They say the truth will set you free. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the truth will also destroy everyone who ever underestimated you. My name is Jordan Rivera. I'm 35 years old. And 3 weeks ago, my mother screamed 5 words that changed everything: get out and never come back. I stood there stunned as my entire family watched in silence. No one defended me. Not my father, not my brother, not my sister. They just let it happen. After 35 years of being the invisible daughter, the disappointment, the family punching bag, I was finally being erased completely. So I left. I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on my back and a mysterious wooden box my late grandmother had hidden for me. A box that would reveal secrets so devastating it would bring my entire family to their knees. Because here's what they didn't know. For 6 years, I'd been secretly paying their $200 mortgage every single month. For 6 years, I'd kept them from losing everything while they treated me like garbage. And when my father called 3 weeks later, panic in his voice, asking why I stopped contributing to the family, I smiled. Because by then, I'd discovered the truth about who really owned that house. I'd uncovered their charity scam that stole $280,000 from innocent people. And I'd been handed on a silver platter by my grandmother the evidence to destroy them all. This is the story of how I went from invisible to unstoppable. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. My name is Jordan Rivera. I'm 35 years old, a senior data strategist in a firm that prefers me behind the scenes, which suits me just fine. I grew up in a wealthy family that praised appearances but never nurtured the people inside the picture frame. For most of my life, I learned how to disappear in plain sight, especially inside the house where I was supposed to feel safest. That was the strange part, how easily a person could become invisible in their own home, how naturally silence could replace identity. I never fully understood that truth until the night everything fell apart. The evening began like so many others in the Rivera household, tension lingering in the air like humidity before a storm. I moved quietly through the living room, careful not to draw attention. My mother Veronica sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture stiff, her expression fixed into the sharp, polished smile she reserved for guests. She glanced at me only long enough to deliver one of her usual comments. "Jordan's lucky we still let her live here." A few polite laughs followed. No one questioned her, and I certainly didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that silence was safer. My father Robert sat in his usual chair, not absent, but certainly not present. He existed in a fog of detachment, a man who believed stillness was neutrality. My younger brother Dominic lounged near the fireplace, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up with that smirk of his that said he knew exactly which buttons to press to hurt me, but didn't need to bother right now. My sister Isabella, impossibly elegant and always adored, avoided eye contact with me, as if acknowledging my presence might dim her shine. I'd spent years shrinking myself, taking shallow breaths, monitoring every movement, every word. Pretending smallness kept the peace. But inside that familiar ache pulsed the one my grandmother used to see when no one else noticed. "One day, sweetheart," she once whispered to me, "you'll understand why I'm leaving you, what I'm leaving you." At the time, I had no idea what she meant. After she died, that memory faded into the background, until tonight. The doorbell rang. A courier handed Dominic a thick envelope and he tossed it onto the coffee table without a thought. It was Isabella who picked it up, her manicured fingers freezing on the edge of the paper as she read the heading. She didn't speak, just let it drop from her hand as though it had burned her. Foreclosure notice. My mother snatched it before it hit the floor. Her eyes scanned the page, widening in horror before narrowing in rage. "This can't be right," she hissed. Then louder, turning toward me as if the conclusion was obvious. "What did you do? What?" I whispered because that was all I could manage. "What did you do?" She repeated, her voice rising with each word. "You haven't been contributing. You've been living here for free while the rest of us carry everything I knew this day would come. I told your father this would happen." My father said nothing. He didn't even look at me. The irony stung so sharply I felt dizzy. I had been paying the mortgage every month $3,200 for 6 years. Quietly, anonymously, not out of duty but because the thought of the house being lost had terrified me once. I never told them because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. They'd take and take until nothing was left of me. "Mom," I tried gently, "I have been paying." She cut me off with a slicing gesture. "Don't you dare lie to me. You think money makes you special? You think buying your way into this family earns our love?" I stared at her speechless. My existence had been reduced to so little for so long that now even the truth sounded like an accusation in her voice. Dominic leaned back and muttered, "Typical." Isabella looked at the ceiling, refusing to be involved. That's when something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically. Just, finally. "I've been paying it," I said anyway, because I needed to hear the truth out loud, even if no one else believed it. Every month, since the year Grandma died. My mother laughed. A sharp, cutting sound. "You. Paying our mortgage. You can barely take care of yourself." It wasn't a debate. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a verdict she delivered long before tonight, a verdict she intended to uphold forever. Her face contorted, and before I could speak again, she screamed the words that pushed my life off its familiar axis. "Get out and never come back." The room fell silent. Not one person interrupted her. Not one person defended me. They just watched as though I were a stranger being removed from a place I never belonged. I walked toward the front door in a daze, my vision blurred around the edges. And then something caught my eye. A small wooden box. It sat on the hallway table, half hidden behind a decorative vase. The brass plaque gleamed under the dim light. "For Jordan. Open when you're finally free." My breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. Grandma's. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The wood was warm, familiar, a weight that felt like both a burden and a blessing. Outside, the night air wrapped around me as I sank into the driver's seat of my car. For the first time in my life, I had no home to return to, yet something about the box made my heart steady. I lifted the lid. Inside was a single USB drive labeled in my grandmother's handwriting, "The truth about your family." I stared at it, feeling the last thread of my old life unravel. Cliffhanger. And then I wondered, not with fear, but with certainty, what truth she had tried to save me from. The box sat in my lap for several minutes after I discovered the USB, but I couldn't bring myself to start the engine. I just sat there staring at the little drive that somehow felt heavier than the entire house I had been thrown out of. Eventually, the shock froze into a kind of precise clarity. I turned the key, pulled away from the curb, and didn't look back. The night swallowed the street I'd grown up on, and for the first time I didn't feel tethered to it. I drove toward the only place that truly belonged to me. My penthouse sat 30 floors above the city, a glass and steel refuge overlooking miles of light stretching into the horizon. No one in my family had ever stepped foot inside. They didn't even know it existed, and that was intentional. I parked, rode the elevator up, and unlocked the door to quietness, clean lines, soft lighting, a living room filled with the warmth I'd built for myself. Nothing about it resembled the Victorian house I had just been exiled from. That place had always felt like a museum curated by my mother, where I was merely a misplaced artifact. This place, however, was alive with breath and intention. It reflected me, not them. I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of wine, and leaned against the counter. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the sudden realization that I was free. Truly free. The penthouse, with its vaulted ceilings and panoramic windows, was the physical manifestation of years of work my family never saw or cared to understand. They had mocked my computer job, convinced it was a hobby rather than a career. Meanwhile, I had worked 80-hour weeks building something they could never imagine. Rivera Consulting began as a side project in a cramped apartment. I coded at night, met clients on weekends, and slowly gathered enough momentum to step away from traditional employment. Eventually, my little venture evolved into a boutique consulting firm with international clients, high retainers, and enough stability to buy this very penthouse. I had kept all of it secret, knowing that if my family got even a whiff of my success, they would latch on like leeches. I swallowed a mouthful of wine and set the glass down. The USB sat on the coffee table unassuming and silent. My grandmother's handwriting on the label felt like a hand reaching out from the past, steady and gentle, in ways no one else in my family had ever been. With a slow breath, I plugged it into my laptop. The screen lit up, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a video file opened on its own. My grandmother appeared on the screen sitting in her bedroom. The sight of her face hit me like a physical blow. She looked older than I remembered, her hair thinner. Her frame more fragile, but her expression was unmistakably hers. Soft, wise, and fiercely protective. "Jordan, my darling." She began, her voice steady, yet edged with sorrow. "If you're watching this, then I have passed away, and they've kicked you out of the house, just as I predicted they would." My breath caught. I sank onto the couch. "I wish I could have prevented it," she continued. "But every time I tried to help you, they threatened to cut me off from you entirely. Your mother's cruelty runs deeper than you know. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive. But I can protect you now." Her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. I felt my own throat tighten in response. "I spent my final years preparing for this day," she said. "Gathering evidence, organizing documents, planning for the moment you would finally be free. Everything on this drive is for you alone." The video ended abruptly. My hand hovered over the touchpad, unsure which part of the digital minefield to step into first. The screen displayed a set of folders, each meticulously labeled in the same looping handwriting I recognized from childhood birthday cards. Evidence, audio and video property documents, financial records. The plan for severe heartbreak. Only a chill rippled down my spine. My grandmother had been preparing for this for years, long before I understood the depths of my mother's resentment. I clicked open the first folder. 47 files appeared arranged chronologically, the earliest dated back to when I was 9 years old. My heart pounded in my ears as I clicked the first audio file. Veronica's voice burst through the speakers, cold, sharp, and unmistakable. "You ruined my body. You ruined my life. I should have stopped at 2 children." My breath caught. I froze. I hadn't remembered the words exactly, but I remembered the feeling, the shame burning beneath my ribs, the desperate desire to disappear. Hearing it now, unmistakable and preserved, ripped something open inside me. The recording continued the sound of my younger self, quietly crying, trying not to be heard. My grandmother's voice, faint but present, calling my name from another room. The audio crackled, then ended. I covered my mouth with my hand. I had spent my entire life second-guessing my own memories, wondering whether I had exaggerated, misunderstood, misremembered. But Margaret hadn't doubted. She had been there listening, witnessing, collecting proof for a day she prayed would never come, but knew inevitably would. I clicked another file. My mother again, this time berating me for stealing Isabella's spotlight because I had dared to win a science fair ribbon. Another file, Dominic mocking me while my father's voice said nothing. Each recording was another weight pressing onto my chest. I paused the playback, unable to breathe. The laptop chimed suddenly. My phone lit up on the table. Dad calling. At the same time, an email notification flashed across the corner of the screen. Rivera Family Community Heroes Charity Award Ceremony live, broadcast in 3 weeks. My father's name kept flashing. I stared at the screen, torn between the voice that once made me feel invisible and the grandmother who had finally made me feel seen. And for the first time, I wondered if the truth on this drive was only the beginning. My father's name still glowed on my phone screen when I finally picked it up, more out of morbid curiosity than any desire to hear his voice. The echoes of my mother's insults from the audio files still clung to me, but I forced myself to breathe evenly before speaking. "Hello?" I said, though the word felt foreign. "Jordan." My father's voice trembled, coated in a familiar blend of forced gentleness and quiet desperation. It was the tone he used when he wanted something, the one that pretended to be paternal, but always carried the faint metallic clink of emotional chains. "Honey, I'm so glad you answered. Your mother, she was just having a bad day. You know how she can be. A bad day." That was how he chose to describe being screamed at and thrown out of my own childhood home like unwelcome trash. I let the silence stretch, and he rushed to fill it. "We're all under a great deal of stress right now," he continued. "Your mother didn't mean what she said. She's overwhelmed with everything that's happening, and we really need your help during this difficult time." There it was, laid out as predictably as ever. Not an apology, not accountability, just a plea wrapped in guilt and obligation. "What help?" I asked coolly. "Are you referring to exactly?" "The mortgage," he said immediately. "If you could just continue what you've been doing, maybe for a little while longer at least, until things settle down. We're in a complicated situation right now, financially speaking." My grip tightened on the phone. "If you're so financially stable, why can't you pay it yourselves? The way you've claimed you always have." There was a beat of silence, and for the first time in my life, I heard my father truly stumble. "There are complications with money right now. And there are things about your grandmother's estate that, well, your mother didn't want you to know certain details about the house." My heart jolted. What details? I didn't mean that, he said quickly, too quickly. I misspoke. Forget I said anything, but I knew him too well. He had revealed something substantial without meaning to, something tied to my grandmother's property, something my mother had been determined to bury. Every nerve in my body felt suddenly awake. He cleared his throat, his tone softening again as he tried to pivot. "Jordan, in 3 weeks, our family is receiving the Community Heroes Charity Award. It's going to be televised on the local PBS affiliate. They want to highlight the impact of our nonprofit work with underprivileged children. It's a big honor." I said nothing, waiting for the actual reason this mattered to him. "We need you to be there," he continued, voice thick with pressure. "We need to show we're a united family. And the mortgage absolutely has to be current by then. If we lose the house right before the ceremony, it will be a disaster." There it was. The truth beneath the sugarcoating. They needed my silence, my compliance, and my wallet. They didn't want me. They wanted the image of me standing beside them on television, proof that the Rivers family was the philanthropic, loving dynasty they pretended to be. Then he added the line that turned my stomach. "Don't you want to make your grandmother proud? She always said family was everything." I closed my eyes. "Using her memory won't work," I said softly. He exhaled sharply, as if offended by my lack of sentimentality. "Jordan, please. Just do this for us. For the family." "No," I said. "I'm not paying another cent." The silence that followed vibrated with anger he was trying desperately to hide. I could practically hear the moment he decided he would report back to my mother with whatever twisted version of this conversation suited them best. "I'll think about the ceremony," I added, though my voice made clear that thinking about it didn't guarantee anything. I hung up before he could respond. My laptop screen was still open to the folders from the USB. The lingering image of my grandmother's tired, loving face hovered in my mind. I needed answers not from my father, but from her. Yet something tugged at me, a suspicion gnawing at the edges of everything he'd just said. I opened a browser and typed Rivera Children's Fund into the search bar. The results hit instantly. Articles, photos, videos. A glossy website showing smiling children holding backpacks, stacks of books, boxes labeled with donation stickers. And there was my family standing front and center in every image. Veronica handing out toys. Dominic posing with children as if he'd spent his entire life serving others. Isabella beaming beside a banner that read, "Annual Holiday Drive Changing Lives Together." My skin prickled. The site claimed they'd raised over $280,000 for low-income families in the last 5 years. Yet I couldn't remember a single conversation in that house involving actual charity. Not one. My family didn't give. They took. They lived for luxury appearances and social rank, not service. So where had all that money gone? I scrolled through photos. Isabella's Chanel bag from 2 weeks ago. Dominic's Rolex he bragged about last month. My parents' trip to Monaco they insisted was a charity networking retreat. All of it suddenly fit together too neatly, as if the truth had been lying in plain sight waiting for me to finally look closely. My eyes drifted back to the USB folders. There was one I hadn't opened yet. Financial records. My pulse quickened as I clicked it open. Rows and rows of files appeared, some labeled with dates, others with cryptic names. But one stood out immediately, not because it was hidden, but because it needed no explanation at all. Charity Fraud Evidence Collection, 2019-2024. A chill ran straight down my spine. Whatever my father had tried to conceal wasn't just about the house. It was about everything. And my grandmother had known. I stared at the file name on the screen, Charity Fraud Evidence Collection, 2019-2024, until the letters blurred. My father's voice still echoed in my ears from the night before, pleading, manipulating, doing his best to wrap a chain around my guilt and tug. But whatever pull he once had over me dissolved the moment I double-clicked the folder. The window opened, and my grandmother's quiet, methodical devotion to the truth spilled out in rows of documents. I spent the entire next day at my kitchen island surrounded by printouts, highlighters, notepads, and the steady hum of the espresso machine. The sun rose, crossed the sky, and dipped again, and I barely noticed. Each file drew me deeper into a world my grandmother had been mapping long before I realized anything was wrong. She had been suspicious of the family's sudden philanthropic awakening, the way the Rivera Children's Fund appeared out of thin air and quickly became my mother's favorite bragging point at country club brunches. But Margaret hadn't just suspected. She had investigated. She had documented. She had built a case the way only a woman who'd lived through decades of Rivera lies could. The first set of files contained bank statements linked to the nonprofit. I scanned the deposits column, $25 contributions from a retired school teacher, a series of $200 donations from a small bakery that could barely keep its doors open, a heartbreaking $15,000 lump sum from a widower who'd written in the memo line, "For winter coats for the children." My throat tightened. Every deposit represented hope, trust, and sacrifice. Then I moved to the withdrawals column, luxury spas, flights to Monaco, jewelry purchases from high-end boutiques, a payment that matched the price of Dominic's Rolex, hotel charges from Cancun that aligned perfectly with Isabella's spring break photos on her social media page, $280,000 in donations over 5 years. Only $14,000 spent on anything remotely charitable, and even that money went to cheap toys for staged photo opportunities. $266,000 siphoned into personal accounts, disguised through reimbursement requests and fabricated operational expenses. The numbers churned my stomach. My grandmother had known. She had seen the charity for what it really was, a smokescreen, a vanity project, a criminal pipeline feeding the Rivera lifestyle. She had pieced together screenshots of tax filings complete with red flags highlighted in her delicate handwriting. I opened one PDF after another, each detailing how Veronica manipulated the paperwork to conceal personal spending under vague labels like administrative fees, community engagement travel, or gala preparation costs. My eyes burned as I studied another document, a series of website screenshots. The smiling children on the homepage were stock images from Shutterstock. My grandmother had included the URLs proving their origins. Not a single photograph featured a real beneficiary. The charity existed almost entirely online, its function less about service and more about polishing the Rivera image. The scope of their deception grew heavier with every file. I pulled up a spreadsheet listing donors. There were 47 of them. Families, churches, retirees living on fixed incomes, small business owners who could barely make rent each month, people who had given out of kindness and belief that the Riveras were doing something noble. A handwritten letter, scanned and uploaded, caught my eye. It was from a woman named Mary Whitfield. She had donated $8,000, her late husband's life insurance money. She wrote that she wanted foster children to feel joy this Christmas. That money didn't buy a single toy. It paid for Isabella to sip margaritas in the sand while posting captions about finding herself. Then there were the thank you notes Veronica had written. Each one was a masterclass in fabrication filled with sentimental lies about helping little Maria get her first backpack or putting warm coats on the shoulders of homeless teens. My grandmother had saved dozens of them. I read each one with growing numbness. They weren't just fraudulent. They were cruel, exploiting the goodness of people who genuinely wanted to help children. By mid-afternoon, my head throbbed, but I pushed through to the last subfolder labeled Award Preparation. Inside were emails between my parents and event organizers. The upcoming Community Heroes Charity Awards ceremony was more elaborate than I'd realized. It would be broadcast live on PBS and streamed across multiple platforms. Local officials would attend. Donors would be invited. My mother would give a speech claiming to represent a legacy of compassion and service. The irony hit me with the clarity of a lightning bolt. They were about to be celebrated for the very crimes they had committed. They were going to stand on a stage built from stolen generosity and bask in applause they did not deserve, and the community would continue believing the lie, unless someone told the truth. A slow awareness began to bloom inside my mind, a shape forming just beyond the edge of clarity. If the ceremony was the mountain peak of their deception, then it was also the perfect place to release an avalanche. Exposing them there wouldn't be petty revenge. It would be justice. It would be accountability. It would be the only way to make sure the donors, those good-hearted, unsuspecting people, knew what had been done with their money. But to do it properly, I needed more than my grandmother's files. I needed current, verifiable forensic evidence. Something airtight that would stand up in court. Something undeniable. My grandmother had given me a map. Now I needed to gather the last pieces of the puzzle. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I reached a number I hadn't called in years. The forensic accountant had worked with my firm on a corporate case, once the sort of person who could trace a dollar through fire and fog. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, it's Jordan Rivera." I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. "I need a full analysis of a nonprofit's finances, and I need it done in 2 weeks." There was a pause, then a slow exhale. "This must be serious." "It is," I said. "It's about to get even more serious." I stayed at the kitchen island long after the call with the forensic accountant ended, staring at the folders on my laptop as if they might rearrange themselves into answers I wasn't yet ready to face. The weight of everything I'd learned pressed against the room's silence. My grandmother had documented years of deception, but something inside me whispered that the truth went even further back than the files I had opened. That whisper took me somewhere I hadn't intended to revisit, but suddenly couldn't avoid. It carried me to a night 10 years ago when I was 25. I had just sold my first tiny startup, a data cleaning tool I built while balancing full-time work and graduate school. The acquisition wasn't life-changing money, not in the way tech headlines like to exaggerate, but $180,000 felt like salvation to someone who had been living on caffeine takeout noodles, and the fragile belief that I could carve out a life independent from the people who constantly undermined me. I had planned to use the money for a down payment on my first apartment, a place of my own, a small space with quiet walls and no sharp words echoing through it. But those plans evaporated the night I came home late from the office and heard my parents arguing in the kitchen. It wasn't their usual bickering. There was desperation in their voices, a raw panic I had never heard before. "We can't lose the house, Robert," my mother cried, her voice breaking. "We will be humiliated. Everyone will know. The committee will know. The church will know." My father muttered something I couldn't make out, but my mother snapped back. "No, you don't understand. 30 days. They gave us 30 days to pay, or they take everything. Everything." I froze just outside the doorway. My mother rarely cried. Most of her emotions came wrapped in anger polished like weapons. But that night she looked genuinely frightened, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. I had never seen her like that. For a moment she wasn't the woman who belittled me or compared me unfavorably to my siblings. She was simply terrified, and I couldn't bear it. I slipped back into the hallway before they noticed me. I remember sinking onto the bottom stair, the carpet rough against my palms, as I tried to make sense of what I'd overheard. They were losing the house, my childhood home, the place I'd never felt welcome in yet somehow still felt responsible for. I was the eldest, the one who tried again and again to earn a place in that family. Maybe if I saved them, they would finally see me, finally appreciate me. Maybe rescuing them would mean I was at last worthy. That thought was embarrassing now, but at 25, it felt like purpose. The next morning I called the bank pretending to be my mother. I learned the full extent of their situation. Veronica had racked up gambling debts. My father had invested in what he called a sure thing, a venture that failed before it even launched. They were months behind on payments. Foreclosure was already in motion. I didn't hesitate. I used every penny from my startup exit, all $180,000, to pay off the arrears and secure 6 months of future payments. I arranged it through a shell company I created just for that purpose. I made it appear as though the bank had discovered a clerical error in their paperwork and had issued an extension. No one questioned it. Why would they? The universe always seemed to bend in my mother's favor. Veronica told her friends that the bank had realized they couldn't afford to lose customers like us. She said it with such confidence, such entitlement, that I almost envied her ability to rewrite reality whenever it suited her. I stayed silent, convincing myself it didn't matter that they didn't know. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I couldn't stand to see them fall apart. But 3 months later, when my mother pulled into the driveway in a new Mercedes, she looked at my car, my dependable aging Honda, and sighed dramatically. Honestly, Jordan, you need to take better care of your appearance. People judge. Something inside me cracked that day. I had saved them, completely, quietly, and it had changed absolutely nothing. There was only one person I told, my grandmother. I remember sitting at her small kitchen table, the scent of peppermint tea drifting between us. Her hands were thin but steady when she reached across the table to hold mine. "You have a beautiful heart, sweetheart," she said gently. "But you can't buy love from people who are incapable of giving it." I didn't understand it then. I thought she meant I should be patient, that eventually my mother would soften. Now I know she was trying to prepare me for the truth. Some people cannot love without condition because they have never learned how. My grandmother squeezed my hands. "If they ever try to use you this way again," she said, her voice firmer, "promise me you'll protect yourself." I nodded, though at the time I didn't know what protecting myself even meant. I still believed loyalty was a path to safety. And remember, she added, her eyes glimmering with something I didn't yet recognize, "I'm making arrangements. When the time comes, you'll have what you need to be free." It is only now, sitting in my penthouse, surrounded by evidence she gathered over a decade, that I understand she had meant every word. I blink away the memory and refocus on the laptop. My gaze drifts to the next folder on the USB property documents. A cold tightness forms in my chest as I click it open. Dozens of files appear, but one leaps out instantly. A single line of text that seems to widen on the screen, stretching into my lungs until I can barely breathe. Original property deed. Margaret Rivera, 1987. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about the house and my family shattered. The file name kept pulsing in my vision. Original property deed. Margaret Rivera, 1987, as though my grandmother herself were reaching across the years to tap me on the shoulder. I clicked it open before I let my mind invent explanations that might soften whatever truth waited inside. The scanned document filled the screen, slightly faded around the edges, but unmistakably official, stamped and recorded by the county clerk more than 3 decades ago. And there it was, in clean block type, Margaret A. Rivera, sole purchaser and sole owner of the property at 847 Maple Avenue. Not Robert Rivera, not Veronica Rivera. No joint title, no transfer, just Margaret. My breath left me in one sharp exhale that barely felt like air. I read the document 3 more times to convince myself I wasn't misinterpreting something fundamental. But the meaning only sharpened with each pass. My parents had lived in that house for more than 30 years, built their entire identity around it, claimed it as the cornerstone of our family legacy, and wielded it as a weapon against me every time I failed to meet Veronica's impossible standards. Yet it had never belonged to them, not legally, not financially, not in any way. Every memory came rushing back with new color, new clarity. All the times my mother hissed that I should be grateful she let me stay under her roof. All the ultimatums about throwing me out of my house. All the resentment she hurled at me for not appreciating the sacrifices she believed she'd made. But none of it was real. She hadn't sacrificed anything. She had been living in a house my grandmother paid for, entirely pretending ownership while exploiting the status that came with it. My mind raced through the implications. If my grandmother never transferred ownership, then my parents never had a right to use the house as collateral. They never had the authority to take out additional loans. They never had the legal standing to sign any mortgage extension, let alone the ones they'd fraudulently pinned on me. Every threat, every insult, every claim to dominance over that property was rooted in a lie. I scrolled further and found a stack of additional documents scanned into the folder. The first made my stomach turn, a quitclaim deed unsigned by Margaret, but bearing a shaky imitation of her handwriting on the signature line. Even to my untrained eye, the forgery was obvious. The date stamp was incomplete and the notary section was blank. Someone, likely my mother, had attempted to force my grandmother's name onto a deed she never agreed to sign. I clicked the next document, another quitclaim deed, this time fully filled out but never notarized. Again, the signature looked wrong too, angular, missing the soft loops my grandmother always made. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something cold thread its way down my spine. My family hadn't just manipulated me emotionally. They had actively tried to steal from my grandmother, from me, from the estate. They weren't careless. They were calculating. The next file was a scanned letter, its edges crumpled as if Margaret had folded and unfolded it many times. It was addressed to her, written in my mother's unmistakable script. I read it slowly, each sentence pulling tighter on a knot in my chest. Mother, this house belongs to the family. It is not appropriate for it to remain solely in your name. We need you to transfer ownership to us so we can manage it properly. It's time for the next generation to inherit, and we cannot do that if you refuse to cooperate. My mother had always been skilled in manipulation, but seeing her words preserved like this revealed a selfishness so stark it made my hands shake. There was no affection in that letter, no gratitude, only entitlement. Another document appeared, dated 2019. This one was more direct and far uglier. If you don't sign the transfer, I may have no choice but to limit your time with Jordan. It's not healthy for the family dynamic when you undermine our authority. We all want what's best for her, but this conflict is creating unnecessary strain. I felt the air leave my lungs. The threat was unmistakable. My mother had tried to leverage me, her own daughter, as a bargaining chip to force my grandmother into surrendering her home. That explained the odd stretches of time when Grandma seemed more distant, more cautious around my parents, as though smiling too warmly at me might bring down some private punishment. But my grandmother hadn't yielded. The next file was a letter from her attorney 6 months before her death. I opened it, bracing myself. Per your instructions, Margaret, I have updated the estate documents. Under no circumstances is the property at 847 Maple Avenue to transfer to Robert or Veronica Rivera. It is to be assigned directly to your granddaughter Jordan Rivera, following the completion of probate. Your clarity on this matter has been noted. My vision blurred as I read the letter again, forcing the words into focus. My grandmother had protected me even as my parents had tried to cut me off from her. She had endured pressure, coercion, and threats to maintain control of the house because she intended for it to be mine. She knew what they were capable of, and she knew I would eventually need a place of refuge and leverage. A lump formed in my throat as I clicked the last file in the folder. Another video opened. My grandmother appeared again, but this time she looked smaller. Frailer, the illness she tried to hide apparent in the slump of her shoulders and the pallor of her skin. Yet her eyes still held that same fierce intelligence. "Jordan," she began softly, "if you're watching this, then you've discovered the house documents. I wanted to explain this part myself." She took a slow breath. "I bought that house before your parents married. I thought it would be a safe place for our family, a place where love could grow. Over time, I realized I was the only one trying to nurture that environment." She paused, her gaze drifting slightly as though recalling the decades that had weighed down her hope. "Your mother will try to claim the house when I'm gone. She may even say she deserves it. But I left everything documented with my attorney Howard Mills at Mills & Associates. The deed is secured with the county. The property is yours, sweetheart. It was always meant to be yours." She looked down briefly, her voice thickening. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Veronica threatened to limit my time with you if I changed my will or transferred anything without her approval. So I had to pretend to agree while I made separate arrangements to ensure you would be protected." Her eyes met the camera again, shining with a grief that felt both heavy and determined. "Use this house as leverage when you need it, and don't feel guilty about taking what is rightfully yours. They never earned it." The video ended, leaving the room painfully still. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number printed in her attorney's letter. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "Mills & Associates. This is Howard Mills." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Mr. Mills, this is Jordan Rivera. I need to know who legally owns the property at 847 Maple Avenue right now." The moment the attorney answered my question, there was a brief pause on the line, the kind that suggested he was pulling up documents already waiting in some meticulously organized digital drawer. When he spoke again, his voice carried the calm certainty of someone who knew he was about to drop a truth that would rearrange the ground beneath me. "Ms. Rivera, he began to answer your question simply. You are the legal owner of 847 Maple Avenue." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "I'm sorry, what, you own the property," he repeated. "You have owned it for approximately 6 months." The air in the room thickened. My pulse stuttered. It felt as though someone had placed a hand between my shoulder blades and shoved me into an entirely new reality. How I whispered. "I never received anything. No notice, no call." "That was by design," he said gently. "Your grandmother left very specific instructions. She believed you would reach out when the time was right. She did not want you notified prematurely and risk having your parents intercept communication or create additional distress. Her exact words were, 'Jordan will contact you when she is ready to know.'" I sank into my chair, gripping the armrest as if I needed something solid to anchor me. Ready to know. My grandmother had predicted this. Not vaguely, not metaphorically. She had anticipated the exact scenario, me being kicked out of the house, discovering the USB, learning the truth about the deed. She had built a path out of the cage she knew my parents would eventually force shut. Mr. Mills continued. "The estate entered probate 8 months ago, 2 months after her death. Everything proceeded smoothly. You were designated the sole heir of the property per your grandmother's will. The deed transferred to you upon probate closure. I struggled to make the timeline fit together. And my parents, I asked. They never questioned it." "Oh, they questioned it," he said with a short exhale. "They attempted to file claims asserting they were joint owners by virtue of common law, marriage property rights, arguing they had cohabitated and contributed financially for decades. I almost laughed, the bitterness catching in my throat. But the house was bought before they were even married. Precisely. The original deed is clear. Your grandmother purchased it outright in 1987. There was no transfer, no shared ownership, and she maintained exclusive title throughout her life. Common law claims do not override explicit documented ownership for property acquired independently before marriage. The probate court rejected their filings immediately. I pressed my fingers to my temple. "Do they know it was denied?" "No," he replied. "They believe the matter is still under review. They will not be informed unless they request updated status, which they have not done." He hesitated for a moment. "Your grandmother anticipated their persistence. She wanted to prevent them from contesting your ownership before you were prepared." I let the words settle, letting them fill the hollow places inside me that had formed over decades of gaslighting and invisibility. For 6 months, while my mother screamed that she could throw me out of her house, while my father urged me to support the household, while my siblings treated me like a guest, overstaying my welcome, I had been the legal owner of that property. Every insult, every order, every threat had been built on a fiction they didn't even realize had already collapsed beneath them. Something clicked sharply in my mind like a puzzle piece snapping into place. The foreclosure. The accelerated notices. The urgency. It all made sense now. Because legally the mortgage was tied to me, not them. I had stopped paying it 3 months ago, long before I knew the truth, simply because I was done enabling their lifestyle. The bank didn't care what my parents were doing. To them, I was the owner. And when I stopped paying, foreclosure resumed. My grandmother's plan had been unfolding around me long before I understood any part of it. She had set a trap that moved slowly, steadily, inevitably. And now my family was backed into a corner without realizing I held the key to every locked door. I took a slow breath. "Mr. Mills," I said, "I want to delay any legal actions until after a specific event." He sounded cautious. "That depends. What kind of delay are you requesting?" "There's a charity award ceremony in 3 weeks," I said. "My family is being honored publicly. I want the truth to come out after the ceremony. I want them to stand on that stage and smile into cameras while knowing nothing about what's coming." He paused. "I understand the emotional appeal, but you should know this is risky. People under pressure sometimes damage property, conceal evidence, or attempt to complicate matters legally." "I'm aware," I said quietly. "And I'm willing to take that risk." "You're certain?" "Yes. They've damaged me for 35 years. I can handle 3 more weeks. And I want the entire community to see them for who they are before I take the house from under them." There was another long silence on the line, and when he spoke again, his voice held a note of reluctant respect. "Very well. I can prepare all eviction filings now and hold them until you give the signal. Once submitted, the process begins immediately." Relief and power mingled in my chest, creating an unfamiliar warmth. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't the daughter cowering under my mother's sharp tongue or my father's passive silence. I was the homeowner, the rightful heir, the woman holding every card while they clung to a lie. "Thank you, Mr. Mills," I said. "I'll contact you when it's time." "Whenever you're ready," he replied. "Your grandmother trusted you. I do as well." The call ended, leaving me in a quiet that felt different than the quiet of the night before. This silence wasn't empty. It was full of strategy, of vindication, of the first breath of freedom I had ever tasted. I stood, stretching the tension from my shoulders, and reached for the laptop again. I was preparing to close the folders when my phone buzzed beside me. A text message. From Isabella, the last person I expected to hear from. "Jordan, please call me. There's something I need to tell you before it's too late. Something about Mom and the house." My hand froze over the screen. Whatever came next was going to shift things again. I could feel it. And I wasn't sure if I was ready or if readiness even mattered anymore. I stared at Isabella's text for a long time before responding. My first instinct was to ignore it, to assume that whatever she suddenly needed to confess was just another branch of the same manipulation tree the family had been harvesting for decades. but something about her phrasing before it's too late lingered in my mind, tugging at me with a subtle urgency. I finally typed a short reply asking where she wanted to meet. She suggested a cafe downtown, a place neither of us had any emotional history with. Neutral ground. When I arrived, I saw her immediately. Isabella was seated at a small corner table, hands wrapped around a cup she seemed too distracted to drink from. She wasn't wearing her usual curated elegance. No designer coat, no immaculate blowout, no jewelry shimmering under the lights. Instead, she had on a simple gray sweater, and her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger, softer, and somehow more human than I'd seen her in years. Her eyes lifted when I approached, widening with something that looked like relief. "Jordan," she whispered, standing halfway before awkwardly sitting again. I took the chair across from her, keeping my expression unreadable. The air between us felt taut, as though one careless word might snap it entirely. "Thank you for coming," she said quickly, fingers tightening around her cup. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now." "You're not wrong," I said. "What's going on?" She swallowed hard. For a moment I thought she might fold in on herself. But then she looked at me with a seriousness I'd rarely seen. "I've always looked up to you," she began softly, "even though I never showed it. I didn't think I was allowed to." I didn't respond. I watched her carefully, waiting for the point, waiting for the hook. She twisted her cup again, a nervous habit that looked painfully out of place on her. "Mom told me years ago," she said, voice trembling, "that if I helped keep you in your place, she would make sure I inherited the house. And I'm ashamed to admit, I went along with it." My pulse skipped. She didn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her untouched coffee. The confession hung between us, ugly and fragile. I forced my face to remain neutral, though I could feel a cold tightening spreading across my chest. "What exactly did you do?" I asked. She winced at the directness. "I was 17 when it started," she whispered. "Mom would tell me to make you look irresponsible in front of relatives, to point out things you forgot or mistakes you made, to repeat comments about how you never helped around the house or how you wasted money. Sometimes she'd tell me to accidentally let slip private things you told her in confidence so everyone would think you were dramatic or unstable." Her voice broke. I didn't understand what I was participating in. I thought it was just normal family stuff. You know how Mom is. You try to survive by doing what she wants. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I remembered those years vividly. The subtle betrayals, the quiet undermining, the way relatives began to treat me with polite pity or thinly veiled frustration, all while lavishing praise on Isabella for things she didn't even work for. And now the truth was sitting across from me, wearing a simple sweater and holding back tears. Isabella continued. "As I got older, I realized Mom's behavior wasn't just tough love. It was cruelty. And she focused most of it on you. I should have said something. I should have stopped helping her. But I didn't. I was scared." She finally met my eyes, and what I saw wasn't the hardness she usually wore, but a plea. A desperate attempt to unburden herself before the consequences of the truth crashed down. "There's something else," she said. "Something worse. 2 years ago, I found letters in Mom's closet. Letters. Grandma wrote to you birthday cards, notes telling you she was proud of your work, invitations to visit her. There were dozens, all addressed to you." A cold numbness spread down my spine. "She hid them." "Yes," Isabella whispered. Tears slipped down her cheeks this time. "She never mailed them. Some were even opened already. I didn't know what to do. I confronted her once and she told me minding my own business was the best way to stay part of the family, so I stopped asking questions." The cafe hum faded around us. I felt as though I were hearing voices through layers of cotton. I had always wondered why my grandmother had grown quieter over the years, why communication from her had seemed inconsistent. Now the truth settled like sediment in my chest. My mother had curated the flow of affection in the family, the way she controlled everything else, hoarding love and approval while starving anyone she chose. I took in Isabella's red eyes, her trembling hands, and felt a complicated mix of rage, pity, and deep uncertainty. She had been both participant and bystander, both tool and victim. And it was impossible to tell which role she inhabited more clearly. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why today?" She flinched at the question. "Because I know something big is happening," she admitted. "You've gone quiet and Mom and Dad are terrified. They're talking in hushed voices, looking through old documents, calling their lawyer at strange hours." She swallowed. "They think if they can challenge Grandma's will, they might save the house. I heard them discussing claiming she was mentally incompetent when she signed it." I felt the shift immediately, a subtle but unmistakable tightening of danger. My parents weren't just panicking, they were preparing for war. Desperation made them reckless, and reckless Riveras were capable of anything. "Why tell me I pushed?" She didn't look away this time. "Because they'll destroy you if they think it will save themselves. And because I don't want to be part of that anymore. I can't keep pretending Mom's version of love is normal. It's not." Her voice fell to a whisper. "And because I'm scared of what she'll do if she finds out the truth about the house." I leaned back slightly, studying her. I needed to know whether her remorse was genuine or just strategic. "Are you coming to me because you feel guilty?" I asked quietly, "or because you want to be on the winning side?" Her lips parted as if I had slapped her. She shook her head, tears slipping free again. "Maybe both," she confessed. "I'm ashamed to admit that, but I don't know how else to explain it." Her honesty surprised me. She wasn't pretending to be absolved. She was acknowledging her selfishness as plainly as her guilt. For the first time in years, I sensed something real in her words. I folded my hands on the table. "If I told you I have the power to destroy Mom and Dad completely," I said, meeting her gaze steadily, "and all you have to do is stay quiet for 3 weeks. Would you?" She drew in a shaky breath, her shoulders trembling. Then, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard from her, she whispered, "Yes." I left the cafe with Isabella's trembling whisper still echoing in my ears. The confession, the guilt, the warning about my parents' plan to challenge the will, it all sharpened the urgency humming beneath my skin. Whatever sympathy I felt for her didn't cloud the reality my family was preparing for a legal assault, and if I didn't move quickly and intelligently, they might still find a way to twist the narrative in their favor. I couldn't let that happen. Not after everything my grandmother sacrificed to protect me. The next morning I met with the forensic accountant recommended by a former colleague. Patricia Brennan greeted me in her office lobby with a firm handshake and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she'd spent a lifetime staring down financial criminals without flinching. She projected a quiet authority that made me feel for the first time in this process that I wasn't fighting alone. Once we settled into her conference room, I spread out the documents I'd brought, files from the USB screenshots, bank records, and the notes I'd compiled during 3 weeks of obsessive research. Patricia scanned the collection with a professional detachment before asking me to walk her through the timeline. I explained the charity, the donations, the expenditures, the discrepancies, and my grandmother's involvement. She listened without interruption, occasionally jotting quick notes on a legal pad. After nearly an hour, she leaned back, lacing her fingers. "Jordan, this is significant. Based on what you've shown me, the Rivera Children's Fund meets every federal criterion for charity fraud. We're looking at tax evasion, wire fraud, misuse of charitable funds, and failure to meet disclosure requirements. This is not small." I steadied myself. "What does that mean for them? Legally?" Her expression did not soften. "If prosecuted, your parents could face 7 to 10 years in federal prison, possibly more depending on how aggressively the U.S. attorney decides to pursue the wire fraud charges. Online solicitation significantly increases severity." I felt a dull ache in my chest, not regret, but a weight settling over the knowledge of what was coming. and my siblings I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Dominic and Isabella are listed as treasurer and secretary. Patricia nodded. Board members of a nonprofit are legally accountable even if they didn't actively participate in operations. If the government determines they should have reasonably known about the fraud, they could be charged as accomplices. However, cooperation with investigators is often taken into account. It may mitigate charges. I knew exactly what that meant. Isabella, who had already begun cracking under the pressure of guilt and fear, might find a lifeline in cooperation. Dominic, who had spent his entire life propped up by entitlement and arrogance, would likely deny everything until the walls closed in around him. His ego would be his downfall. And my mother, she would sooner swallow fire than admit wrongdoing. I thanked Patricia and arranged for her to conduct a full forensic audit over the next 2 weeks, providing her with every password document and account number connected to the charity. When I left her office, I felt a grim sense of momentum. The wheels of accountability were now turning, and nothing my family did could stop them. My next meeting was with Howard Mills. Over the past few weeks, we had developed a strategy that balanced legal caution with calculated timing. Today's session focused on the property itself. Howard reviewed the recent documents my parents had submitted to banks. They've used the house as collateral for 2 personal loans, he said calmly. $30,000 and $55,000. Neither lender knows they don't own the property. This constitutes loan fraud. The words should have shocked me, but at this point, each new revelation felt like another piece sliding into a puzzle I already recognized. Can I press charges? Yes, he replied. You can also use this as leverage. Most people facing both eviction and criminal exposure prefer to negotiate quietly rather than escalate publicly. I folded my arms. I'm not ready to decide yet. Not until after the ceremony. That's your prerogative, he said. But understand the risk. If they sense they're losing control, they may attempt more drastic measures. I met his gaze evenly. They've controlled me my entire life. I'm not afraid of them anymore. His small nod carried the subtle approval of someone who had seen too many clients cave to intimidation. Then we'll wait. I've prepared the eviction paperwork. Once you give the word, I'll file immediately. 30 days is legally sufficient, but I'll draft it as 60 to avoid any suggestion of bad faith. I appreciated his thoroughness. Every step in this process had to be deliberate, precise, undeniable. My last meeting of the day was with Marcus Reed, a PR consultant known for rehabilitating whistleblowers and drowning out smear campaigns before they could gain traction. He had a brisk, analytical manner, constantly evaluating my expressions, tone, and potential vulnerabilities, as though predicting how the public might react. The moment you expose this, he said, your family will blame you. They will paint you as unstable, vindictive, jealous, whatever narrative wins sympathy. You need to control the story from the first second. I nodded. What do you recommend? First, a written statement ready to release immediately following your reveal. Clear, factual, concise. Emotional but not angry. People trust heartbreak more than fury. He tapped his pen thoughtfully. Second, a complete evidence packet prepared for journalists. If you make bold claims but offer no proof, the story becomes, she said they said. You need documents. I have documents. Hundreds. Good. Third, file formal reports with the IRS and the State Attorney General the same day. Once it's an active investigation, any narrative your family tries to push becomes irrelevant compared to official proceedings. And finally, be prepared to do a single interview with a reputable journalist. Someone sympathetic. Someone fair. His words felt heavy but clarifying. I had spent my entire life silenced, minimized, dismissed. Now I was preparing to speak, and the world would listen. What about public backlash, I asked. It will come, he replied bluntly. But if you present yourself as measured, factual, and deeply wounded by years of mistreatment, the public will side with you. Your family's arrogance will do most of the work for us. I had no doubt about that. Pride was the Rivera family crest. By the time I left Marcus's office, my mind thrummed with preparation and purpose. Every path I took now led toward the same convergence point: the charity award ceremony, the stage, the audience, the live broadcast, the moment when everything would be revealed. When I returned home that evening, emotionally drained but resolute, I opened my laptop to check my emails. One subject line immediately froze me in place. PBS Community Awards speaker request. I clicked it open. Ms. Rivera, we would love for you to say a few words about your family's charitable work during the ceremony. Would you be available to speak on stage? I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of fate settling gently into my hands. They wanted me to speak. Perfect. The email from PBS still sat open on my laptop when I finally shut the screen and leaned back, letting the weight of everything settle inside me. Being asked to speak on stage wasn't just an opportunity, it was an invitation from fate. But before stepping into the storm, I was preparing to unleash. I felt an ache deep in my chest, a pull towards someone who had carried me long before I understood the battles she fought on my behalf. I needed grounding. I needed her. The next afternoon, under a gray sky that seemed to bruise the horizon, I drove to Riverside Cemetery for the first time since the funeral 10 months earlier. I had avoided the place, telling myself I was too busy or that visiting wouldn't change anything, but the truth was simpler and far more painful. I hadn't known how to face the grief. Not when everything else in my life felt like it was collapsing. Now, though, the grief felt intertwined with gratitude, a tether I needed to hold before moving forward. I parked near the old willow tree that drooped over the far section of the cemetery. The wind tugged at my coat as I walked white lilies bundled in my arms. They were my grandmother's favorite. She used to say they looked like forgiveness blooming. But as I approached her headstone, a simple granite slab with her name and 2 dates, separated by a dash that now felt far too small to contain the fullness of who she had been, I realized lilies also looked like truth. I knelt and set them at the base of the stone. For a long moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened until it hurt, until the cold air felt like shards each time I breathed. Finally, the words rose on their own. I found everything, Grandma, I whispered. The USB, the deed, all of it. I understand now why you couldn't tell me while you were alive. You were protecting me, and yourself. Hot tears blurred the lettering on the stone. I wasn't just crying for her, I was crying for the little girl I had been, the one who tried so hard to be good enough, quiet enough, successful enough to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I cried for all the birthdays where she was the only one who saw me, for the soft guidance she'd offered when the rest of the family sharpened their voices into knives. I wish you were here, I said, wiping my face. But I think you prepared for this better than I ever could have. The wind rustled through the willow branches above, sounding almost like an answer. I stood, brushing off my hands, ready to leave, but reluctant to let go of the moment. As I stepped back onto the path, I noticed someone walking toward me. An older woman with white curls pinned neatly back, wearing a long navy coat that billowed slightly in the wind. She approached with cautious purpose, her eyes soft but intent. When she reached me, she offered a warm, fragile smile. "Jordan Rivera?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, surprised. "Do I know you?" "My name is Dorothy Walsh," she said. "I was your grandmother's neighbor. More importantly, I was her closest friend." The name tugged at something faint in my memory. I recalled hearing it when I was much younger, back when I spent more weekends with my grandmother than with my own parents. Dorothy stepped closer, her gaze filled with gentle familiarity. "I've been hoping to run into you," she said. "Your grandmother asked me to hold something for you, something she wanted delivered when the time was right." She reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. My name was written across the front in my grandmother's delicate cursive, and the date in the corner stopped my breath. 1 week before she died. My hands trembled as I accepted it. "Thank you," I whispered. Dorothy nodded, but her eyes lingered on me. She loved you more than you know. You were the light of her life even when she couldn't say it the way she wanted to. I swallowed hard and opened the letter carefully. My grandmother's words unfurled in ink that felt almost alive. Jordan, my darling girl. If Dorothy is giving you this, it means you've found the USB and you're preparing to confront them. I want you to know you don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them a relationship. Blood does not obligate you to accept abuse. What you're about to do isn't revenge, it's justice, and it's freedom. I love you more than I ever loved my own son, and I'm sorry I couldn't say that louder while I lived. My vision blurred. Dorothy placed a gentle hand on my arm and guided me to a nearby bench, sensing I needed support. I sat clutching the letter as though it were a lifeline. She spent her last year preparing everything Dorothy said softly. She documented what she could met with lawyers, even practiced what she might say in those videos she left you. She didn't want you caught unarmed in a battle you didn't start. I listened, each word sinking into the hollow places inside me. Dorothy continued, her voice steady and touched with the wisdom of age. She used to tell me Veronica will push Jordan too far one day. That's when she'll finally be free to become who she was meant to be. She wasn't being cruel. She was accepting a truth she'd learned the hard way. I turned toward her. Did you ever experience anything like this? She nodded slowly. I stayed in a toxic family situation for 40 years because I believed leaving would make me selfish. It took me half a lifetime to learn that self-preservation isn't selfishness, it's survival. She squeezed my hand gently. Your grandmother knew that lesson too well, and she wanted you to learn it without waiting decades. I felt something shift inside me, a loosening, a moment of clarity. For so long I had framed everything through the lens of revenge, of payback for years of emotional cruelty. But now, with my grandmother's words in my lap and Dorothy's wisdom beside me, I understood the deeper truth. This wasn't about destruction. It was about reclamation. It was about finally stepping out of the shadows my family had cast over me since childhood and choosing myself. Dorothy rose slowly, adjusting her coat. Take the life she wanted you to have, dear, not the one they tried to trap you in. I stood with her, wiping my eyes. Thank you, I managed. She smiled softly. No thanks needed. Just go live. As she walked away, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The grief, the gratitude, the anger, they all blended into something that felt like resolve. I took one last look at my grandmother's grave, then turned back toward my car, ready for what came next. Before I reached the door, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, expecting perhaps a message from Patricia or Marcus. But the number was unfamiliar. The text made my stomach tighten. This is Robert Rivera's lawyer. We need to discuss the property at 847 Maple Avenue immediately. Your parents are prepared to file legal action. The storm was beginning. The text from my father's lawyer lingered in my mind long after I returned home from the cemetery. I told myself not to let it rattle me, but something about the tone, the urgency, the presumption gnawed at me like a familiar echo from childhood, as if they were once again summoning me back into the role I had spent years trying to escape. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd stood at my grandmother's grave and felt something settle inside me, something resolute and steady. I wouldn't be pulled back into their orbit. The next morning, before I'd even finished my coffee, an official-looking envelope appeared in my inbox, scanned and emailed from my parents' attorney. The subject line read, "Cease and desist notice." My pulse didn't spike. Instead, a cold, almost clinical curiosity came over me. I clicked it open. The letter was full of pomp and bluster, a patchwork of legal jargon clearly intended to intimidate someone who didn't know better. According to this attorney, I had been spreading false information about property ownership, interfering with the legal residence of Mr. and Mrs. Rivera, and causing emotional distress and reputational harm. The letter demanded that I sign a document acknowledging my parents' ownership of the house and agree to cease harassing and defamatory conduct, threatening a defamation lawsuit if I didn't comply within 48 hours. I let out a short, humorless breath. They were so predictable. Whenever they felt cornered, they turned to threats, to rewriting reality, to forcing compliance instead of earning it. At the bottom of the letter, another threat waited, almost laughably bold. They claimed they were prepared to seek a restraining order based on evidence that Jordan Rivera is mentally unstable and has made threats regarding the property. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temple. If they had a legitimate claim, they wouldn't need such theatrics. They were grasping at whatever scraps of control they still believed they had, oblivious to how transparent their desperation had become. Without a second thought, I forwarded the letter to Howard Mills with a single sentence. How badly did they just screw themselves? His reply came less than 20 minutes later. Then my phone rang. When I answered, I could hear the amusement he was barely attempting to restrain. "Jordan," he said, sounding almost delighted. "I hope you're sitting down." "I am," I said. "What's your take?" "They've done you an extraordinary favor," he said. "Truly. This letter is a masterpiece of incompetence." I blinked. "That's not what cease and desist letters are usually called." He chuckled. "Their attorney either didn't check public property records or doesn't understand real estate law, because your ownership is a matter of public record. Anyone with a computer could verify it in under 5 minutes. The letter's claims are false on their face, and sending them in writing establishes clear evidence of their attempt to assert ownership they do not have. So they just made my case stronger, exponentially. If they were to file a lawsuit, it would be dismissed almost immediately. And because you have this letter, we could counter for malicious prosecution. Judges have very little patience for litigants who fabricate claims. This could cost your parents thousands in attorney fees." A ripple of satisfaction ran through me, calm and controlled. "Should I respond?" "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "Do not give them anything. If they file, we'll let them walk straight into the wall they've built. If they don't, they've already established their false claims in writing. Either path benefits you." Also, I did some research on their attorney. He's a general practitioner, divorces, wills, traffic violations. No real estate background. Likely the only person willing to take their case. That didn't surprise me. Reputable attorneys didn't like losing. And this case from their side was unwinnable. "Thanks, Howard," I said. "This helps a lot." "Keep me updated," he replied. "And remember, you're holding all the leverage. They're just now realizing it." After we hung up, the full weight of the situation hit me. For the first time in my life, my family's intimidation tactics didn't land. They floated harmlessly past me, powerless. I wasn't trapped anymore. I was choosing the battlefield. That evening, I heated leftovers for dinner and tried to focus on reviewing evidence for Patricia. But around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Then another, and another, all from Dominic. I didn't need to guess the tone. I pressed play on the first message. "Jordan, you need to back off whatever you're doing. Mom and Dad are stressed enough. Don't make this worse." His voice sounded tight, irritated, but controlled enough to suggest the version of Dominic he showed the world. The second voicemail, left 2 hours later, had lost some of that polish. "I know you think you're smart with your little tech job," he snapped. "But you're playing with fire. Just sign the damn paper and stop causing problems." I sat back, replaying the phrase "little tech job" in my mind. The insult didn't sting. If anything, it only highlighted how little he understood about my world. The third voicemail arrived at 11 o'clock, and the slurred edge of his speech told me he'd been drinking. "You've always been a selfish bitch," he growled. "We gave you everything, and now you're trying to steal our house. I swear to God, Jordan, if you don't drop this." The message cut off abruptly, perhaps because he'd thrown the phone or someone intervened. I saved all 3 voicemails. Evidence wasn't just numbers and documents. Sometimes it was raw truth spoken without filters. Dominic had just handed me proof of aggression, entitlement, and emotional volatility. If I ever needed a restraining order, these messages alone would support it. And if the public ever needed to understand the dynamic behind our fractured family image, these recordings spoke louder than any explanation. I turned off my phone and tried to settle into sleep, but my mind churned. Not with fear, but with planning. Everything was aligning. Every misstep they made tightened the trap they didn't even know they were standing in. At 1 a.m, my phone jolted awake on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen. Veronica. I didn't answer. A voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Her voice flowed through the speaker, syrupy, sweet, and unsettling in its false warmth. Jordan, honey, we need to talk. Woman to woman. There are things about your grandmother you don't understand. Meet me for lunch tomorrow. Please. It's important. Her tone was wrong. Too soft, too practiced. And I knew instantly she wasn't inviting me to talk. She was preparing her next move. I didn't sleep much after listening to my mother's voicemail. The sweetness in her voice unsettled me more than any threat she had ever hurled. Aggression I could predict. Coldness I could understand. But syrupy charm from Veronica was a storm warning something dangerous brewing behind a carefully arranged smile. By morning, I had already decided to meet her. If she wanted one last performance, I'd give her an audience. But this time, I wouldn't be playing a role in her script. She chose an upscale restaurant near the waterfront, a place with white tablecloths and quiet lighting that served as much as a stage as a dining venue. I arrived a few minutes early and took a seat deliberately, positioning myself with a clear view of the entrance. When Veronica swept in, she was dressed with surgical precision, tailored navy dress pearls, hair perfectly smoothed into place. She moved with the confidence of a woman who had never questioned her own authority. Jordan, she cooed as she reached the table, leaning in for a hug. I neatly sidestepped by pulling out my chair. She recovered smoothly as though the rejection hadn't happened. Her composure was part of the performance. I'm so glad you came, she said, sliding gracefully into her seat. I've been doing a lot of thinking, reflecting on our relationship. I kept my expression neutral. I knew the opening act when I heard it. She signaled the server and ordered a glass of wine before continuing, her tone tinged with artificial gentleness. Maybe I've been too hard on you over the years. Parenting doesn't come with a handbook, you know. We all make mistakes. I didn't respond. She took my silence as invitation to continue. I want us to heal, she said softly, folding her hands on the table. We're a family, Jordan, and families move forward. I'd really like for us to put the past behind us. She talked like that for nearly 10 minutes, soft words, vague apologies without substance, careful references to growth and understanding. It was the most polished emotional monologue I'd ever witnessed from her. I wondered how many times she had rehearsed it in the mirror. Finally, when she realized none of it was landing, she shifted gears. There was no hesitation, no stumble in her delivery. It was rehearsed, too. You know, she said, swirling her wine, your grandmother wasn't well in her final years. Dementia can make people do unpredictable things with their estate planning. Any competent lawyer would see she was influenced, likely manipulated, maybe even coerced. There it was, the real agenda. She tried to lace the accusation with concern, but her eyes betrayed the sharp calculation beneath. I simply watched her, giving nothing back. My lack of reaction seemed to frustrate her. The softness in her voice began to fray. You're being unreasonable, she snapped lightly. You've always been so sensitive, Jordan, so dramatic. You make up stories about how terrible we are, but the truth is, we gave you everything. A roof, food, school. You owe us respect for that alone. My voice was calm when I answered. I don't owe you anything. Her expression hardened instantly, as if she had ripped off her own mask. Is that so? She hissed. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with venom she no longer tried to conceal. Let me tell you what I think. You've always been jealous of Isabella's beauty and Dominic's charm. You've always been the weak one, the dull one, the disappointment. And now, because you think you inherited one house, suddenly, you believe you're better than us? I didn't flinch. Her words slid off me the way rain slides off stone. For the first time, I saw her clearly, not as the towering, authoritarian figure of my childhood, but as a small, frantic woman whose power was slipping out of her grasp. Thank you, I said quietly, for finally saying out loud what you've always believed. She blinked, thrown off by my composure. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Before her expression could shift into curiosity, I pressed play on the first 30 seconds of one of Margaret's videos. My grandmother's voice filled the small space between us. Veronica's cruelty toward Jordan has escalated over the years. I worry for my granddaughter's emotional well-being. I stopped the video. Veronica's face had gone white, the blood draining so quickly, I wondered if she might faint. For a moment, she seemed frozen, caught between rage and panic. "What? What is that?" she whispered. "The beginning," I replied. "There's much more." Grandmother documented everything, every word, every action, every lie. She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the other diners as if afraid someone might have overheard. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh," I said, standing slowly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." I pulled a few bills from my wallet and placed them neatly beside my untouched plate. "The charity award ceremony is in 5 days," I told her. "I'll see you there." Her breath hitched a tiny sound of fear leaking through the cracks of her composure. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply stared at me as though the ground beneath her had begun to dissolve. I left without looking back. Outside, the air felt brighter, lighter, as though I had walked out of a lifelong storm cloud into sunlight. My hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't from fear. It was power, quiet, steady, unmistakable. Not the power of hurting someone, but the power of no longer being afraid of them. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the sharp wind clear the last remnants of Veronica's poison from my mind. For the first time, I felt poised, unshakable, ready. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my parking garage. A text from Isabella. "Mom knows you have something. She's planning something bad for the ceremony. Be careful." Isabella's warning sat heavy in my mind long after I set my phone down. The certainty in her message, "Mom is planning something," struck me as more than anxiety. It felt like instinct. A survival instinct she'd spent most of her life suppressing under Veronica's thumb. I believed her. My family was cornered now, and cornered animals could claw blindly, viciously. I needed to be ready. The next morning, my phone rang just as I sat down with breakfast. Patricia's name flashed across the screen. I answered immediately. "I have an update," she said, her tone crisp but edged with irritation. "Someone has been tampering with the charity accounts." I straightened. "What kind of tampering?" "Panicked tampering," she replied. "In the last 72 hours, there have been multiple large transfers moving between accounts with no explanation. And suddenly, a slew of receipts for alleged charitable purchases has been uploaded to the nonprofit's database." My eyebrows rose. Uploaded now. After years of barely documenting anything? Exactly. And the receipts are bad. Sloppy. Backdated in a way that doesn't match bank transaction dates. Whoever is doing this doesn't understand that banks keep permanent records. When this goes to the IRS, and it will, those discrepancies will look like attempts to cover up fraud. I exhaled slowly. "So they're making it worse." "Much worse," she confirmed. "I've captured screenshots of everything, the before state, the sudden changes, the newly added fake receipts. The comparison clearly demonstrates consciousness of guilt. They know something is coming, but they don't know what or when. Their panic is a gift." Her words settled into me with cold clarity. My family wasn't preparing for battle, they were flailing in the dark, unsure where the blow would land. And every frantic move created more evidence. "Thank you, Patricia," I said. "Keep tracking everything. Already on it. And Jordan. They're unraveling. Stay the course." After we hung up, I allowed myself a moment to steady my breathing. The plan was working. Momentum had shifted entirely. My family wasn't strategizing, they were reacting, fearfully, stupidly. A few hours later, I received a long text from Isabella. When her messages were long, it usually meant she was trying to be honest, or terrified. This time it seemed to be both. "Dominic is pushing me," she wrote. "He wants me to tell our parents' lawyer that you forged Grandma's documents." I told him no. I told him I'm done lying. If this goes to court, I'll testify honestly. I'm scared, but I'm not going to protect them anymore. I reread the lines twice. There was a new strength in her tone, thin, wavering, but real. The kind of strength that grows once you finally stop living in fear of someone else's anger. I typed a brief reply telling her I appreciated her honesty. I didn't offer comfort or forgiveness. That wasn't what she seemed to want. She wanted clarity and truth. For once, we were aligned. An hour later, a new email notification appeared. From Dominic Rivera. Subject: Cease your actions. CC Mom Dad. Signature line: Dominic Rivera, JD. I nearly laughed. Dominic had attempted the bar exam once and never passed. Adding JD to his name was not only deceptive, it was pathetic. His email was a muddled attempt at intimidation filled with amateur legal phrases strung together in ways that made no sense. He accused me of malicious intent to defraud the public narrative, whatever that meant, and threatened to expose my fraudulent activity to the media to protect the family's legacy. He demanded I withdraw all defamatory claims or face immediate legal repercussions. Reading it felt like watching a child stomp their feet in an oversized suit. Rage wrapped in insecurity. Bluster wrapped in nonsense. But beneath the ridiculousness was something useful, emotional desperation. He was unraveling right alongside my parents. I forwarded the email to Howard with a single line adding this to the collection. He responded a few minutes later. This is extraordinary. Please keep everything. Evidence wasn't just documents, it was behavior. And my family was providing plenty. With the ceremony less than 48 hours away, I turned my attention to the final preparations. Marcus and I met in my office spread across the conference table with laptops, folders, and color-coded timelines. We need precision, he said, tapping the schedule. Your reveal must feel controlled, not chaotic. It needs to look like truth emerging despite your reluctance, not vengeance. I understand, I said. And I did. Rage was justified, but it wasn't persuasive. Calm truth was. He continued. 3 journalists will be at the ceremony. They know important news is coming, but not what. When you walk on stage, I want them already watching you closely. The moment you begin speaking, they'll start recording. I nodded. And the visuals. We finalized the slides, he said, turning his screen toward me. There were the bank statements showing donation totals versus expenditures. Screenshots of the charity website with timestamps proving when photos had been uploaded. The forged signatures, the property deed, excerpts from my grandmother's videos, everything laid out cleanly, factually. Undeniable. You'll speak for 12 minutes total, Marcus said. Long enough to deliver the truth, short enough to keep the audience sharp. And when you finish, we hit send on the IRS whistleblower report and the AG complaint. The story becomes bigger than your family immediately. I felt the weight and power of the moment taking shape. This wasn't just an exposé, it was a public correction of years of deception, a reclaiming. And when it's all done, I asked quietly. Marcus held my gaze. Then your life becomes yours. The simplicity of that statement settled in my chest like warm stone. Later that afternoon, as I wrapped up revisions on my speech, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. A small cardboard box sat on my doorstep with no return address. I brought it inside, feeling a faint unease ripple through me. When I opened it, the breath punched out of my lungs. Inside were childhood photos, me at 5 years old holding my first science fair ribbon, me in a Halloween costume Grandma made me at the beach building sandcastles. Every single photo had been torn cleanly in half. Some pieces were slit right across my face. At the bottom of the box was a note written in Veronica's unmistakable handwriting. You were never really part of this family anyway. I stood frozen, the torn photographs spilling across my dining table. And for the first time in weeks, my hands began to shake. I stood at my dining table long after the initial shock faded, staring down at the torn photographs scattered like debris from a life I had fought so hard to build distance from. Veronica had always been capable of cruelty, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't just a message, it was a declaration. A final attempt to remind me that in her narrative I had never belonged, would never belong. Yet as I gathered the pieces and placed them back into the box, something inside me solidified. She was wrong. I finally saw the truth clearly. Belonging had never been the prize. Freedom was, and I was hours away from claiming it. I barely slept. But when my alarm chimed at 6 a.m, I woke with a sharp clarity that surprised me. No fog, no dread, just purpose humming through my chest. The day felt like an inhale before a long-awaited exhale. I dressed in workout clothes and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The city was quiet as I ran along the river path, the rhythmic sound of my footsteps grounding me. The sky was pale, stretching into soft color as the sun crept upward, and for the first time in a long time, I felt connected to something steady and unshakable. When I returned home, I made myself a simple breakfast: eggs, fruit, coffee. I ate slowly, deliberately. Today wasn't about rushing. It was about control, calm, intention. After washing the dishes, I reviewed my presentation again, scanning each slide with the same precision I used when preparing investor pitches. The evidence was irrefutable. The timeline was airtight. The tone was factual, grounded, devoid of emotional embellishment. I checked that every file was backed up in 3 places: my laptop, a USB in my purse, and a cloud folder Marcus had encrypted for me. Then I turned to the mirror. I had chosen a navy dress for tonight. Not flashy, not dramatic. Clean lines, professional tailoring, elegant without drawing attention. The opposite of what my mother would wear. I pinned my hair back simply and applied makeup with a steady hand. Not armor, not disguise. Just clarity. When I stepped back and looked at my reflection, I didn't see the girl who had once walked on eggshells through her own home. I didn't see the woman who had quietly shouldered the weight of a family that never saw her. I saw someone who was finally stepping into her rightful power. Someone who was done shrinking. I lifted my phone and snapped a photo, not to post, not to share, but to mark this moment. Proof for myself that I had stood tall on the day everything changed. Before leaving, I typed out a quick message to Dorothy. "Today's the day. Wish me luck." Her response came almost immediately. "Your grandmother is so proud. I'm proud. Go get 'em, dear." I smiled, feeling a warmth settle in my chest. While I prepared in calm solitude, the scene at the Rivera household was undoubtedly the opposite. I didn't need to be there to picture it. Years of observation had made their patterns predictable. Veronica would be treating the morning like a royal coronation. She'd have her hairstylist sculpting every strand into place, her makeup artist layering foundations and powders to achieve her signature immaculate veneer. She likely had her designer gown laid out across the bed, shimmering with unnecessary extravagance. Her jewelry would be excessive, carefully chosen to suggest success rather than the debt and deception that funded it. Robert would be standing in front of the mirror rehearsing a speech filled with empty phrases about community values, generosity, compassion, none of which he practiced in private. His tie would be crooked and Veronica would snap at him while pretending to beam with marital harmony. Dominic would arrive fashionably late, wearing a suit he didn't pay for, carrying the same overconfidence he always mistook for charm. He'd probably reassure his parents that everything was handled falsely, believing his pathetic email had intimidated me into submission. And Isabella, sweet, terrified Isabella, would be the only one aware of the impending storm. She would sit silently watching our family prepare for their spotlight while feeling the ground shake beneath them. Her eyes would follow Veronica, searching for cracks in her facade. She'd see them, even if the others remained blind. "Jordan wouldn't dare make a scene," Veronica would say dismissively. "She's too weak." They still believed that. They had no idea the woman they once controlled was gone. I arrived at the Riverside Civic Center an hour early. The venue was beautiful, arched ceilings, warm lighting, rows of chairs set neatly before a large stage framed by velvet curtains. Staff bustled around making final adjustments, and the AV team waved me over. I introduced myself and explained that I needed to test a presentation I planned to show as part of a family tribute. They accepted this without suspicion, helping me connect my laptop and check volume transitions and lighting. Everything worked flawlessly. When I thanked them, one replied, "We're excited to see what you've prepared." I nodded politely, knowing they would witness something far beyond a tribute. As attendees began filtering in, I took a seat in the back row. I wanted a full view of everything: the stage, the audience, the entrance. Elderly donors arrived first, dressed in their Sunday best, greeting each other warmly. Local business owners and community leaders followed, parents with young children, teachers, volunteers, people whose generosity had been exploited by my family. Their presence tightened the responsibility I felt. I wasn't doing this just for myself. I was also doing it for them. When the Rivera family finally arrived, the applause was immediate. Cameras flashed. Veronica waved with regal enthusiasm, her gown glittering under the lights. Robert stood tall beside her, hand on her back, smiling as though benevolence radiated from him. Dominic charmed the crowd with rehearsed confidence, shaking hands as if he were a public figure. Only Isabella hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room until she spotted me. Her shoulders fell with a mixture of relief and dread. Veronica saw me too. Her smile faltered, not much, just a flicker, but it was enough. She adjusted herself quickly, turning away as though I were beneath acknowledgement. I didn't care. I knew exactly who held the power now. The ceremony began with smaller awards: youth volunteers, local heroes, community partners. I applauded each one, but my heartbeat grew louder with every passing minute. My palms didn't sweat, my legs didn't shake. My mind remained clear. This wasn't panic, it was readiness. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and a single breath, the MC smiled broadly and stepped back to center stage. And now he announced for our final award of the evening, the Community Heroes Charity Award. Please welcome the Rivera family to the stage. I exhaled once. It was time. When the MC called my family to the stage, the applause rose like a wave, warm, thunderous, painfully undeserved. I stayed seated in the back row, watching as Veronica floated up the stairs with the grace of someone who believed the world existed solely to admire her. Robert followed, nodding solemnly to audience members as if he had spent years in service rather than in denial. Dominic strutted, soaking up every ounce of attention. Isabella trailed behind them, her steps small and hesitant, her eyes flicking repeatedly toward me. The MC launched into his introduction with a reverence that made my stomach tighten. He spoke of the Rivera Children's Fund as though it were a beacon of hope rather than a carefully crafted facade. Over $280,000 raised, he declared hundreds of children supported, countless families impacted. The Riveras stand as pillars of generosity in our community. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. Soon. Not yet. Then the lights dimmed for the video montage. Soft piano music filled the hall. Photos flashed across the screen, Veronica holding a toy in front of a smiling child, Robert stacking boxes labeled donations. Dominic shaking hands with a teacher. I recognized the walls behind them. They weren't in schools or shelters. They were in staged locations, community rooms, the lobby of a rented event space. Images designed for impact, for the illusion of impact. Then came the testimonials, 2 women and 1 man speaking earnestly to the camera, thanking the Riveras for helping their fictional children. Their faces stirred a faint memory. It took me a moment to place them. They were actors from a local commercial agency. My mother had actually hired performers to praise her. Around me, the audience sniffled and dabbed their eyes with tissues. I scanned the rows, watching heartbreakingly kind people believing every lie. When the lights returned, Veronica stepped forward, a tissue already in hand. She pressed it delicately beneath her eye, the picture of humbled benevolence. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Helping our community has been the greatest privilege of our lives. Family working together to lift up those who need it most. That is the legacy my mother Margaret passed down to us." The audacity of it made my hands curl into fists. Margaret, the woman she isolated, threatened, manipulated. The woman who spent her final years protecting me from exactly this kind of cruelty. Veronica continued, "We teach our children to serve others, to appreciate their blessings, to give generously." Robert stepped forward next. "Community is everything. Raising our children with these values has been a blessing. We are honored and humbled by this recognition." I felt something settle inside me, an alignment, a sharpening. This was the moment my grandmother had prepared me for. The moment the illusion reached its brightest glow just before shattering. When they finished, the applause swelled again. People genuinely believed my parents were heroes. It struck me then how dangerous performative goodness could be, how easily it could eclipse truth. And then Veronica made her fatal mistake. As the clapping softened, she scanned the room and spotted me in the back row. Her expression flickered, first surprise, then calculation. She turned back to the microphone with a polished smile. "I see my eldest daughter Jordan is here tonight," she announced, her tone dripping sweetness. "Honey, would you like to come up and say a few words about our family's charity work?" A murmur swept through the audience, warm and encouraging. All eyes turned to me. If I refused, I would look petty or unstable. If I complied the way she expected, I would validate her lies. But I wasn't here to play by her rules. I rose slowly. The audience offered polite applause as I made my way down the aisle toward the stage. I saw the 3 journalists Marcus had arranged leaning forward, their cameras ready, their expressions sharpening with anticipation. They knew something was coming. When I reached the stage, Veronica extended the microphone to me with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. She thought she had trapped me. She was wrong. I took the microphone. "Thank you, Mother," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "I do have something important to share with everyone here tonight." There was a brief ripple of curiosity from the audience. I turned toward the MC. "I've prepared a short presentation about the Rivera family. May I use the projection screen?" He brightened, instantly unaware of what he was about to facilitate. Of course, absolutely. Veronica's expression faltered, confusion tightening her smile. She looked toward the wings as if searching for someone to intervene, but the AV technician was already helping me plug in my laptop. The lights dimmed again. My first slide filled the massive screen. The truth about the Rivera Children's Fund, a forensic analysis. A collective murmur rose from the audience. Veronica stiffened, taking one involuntary step toward me. I began speaking, my voice steady, clear. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been working with a forensic accountant to analyze the charity my family operates. What we found is deeply disturbing." "Jordan," Veronica snapped, her voice strained. "This is not appropriate," I continued over her. "Of the $280,000 donated by generous people in this community, only $14,000 was used for any charitable purpose." Silence. Complete, stunned silence. "The remaining $266,000, I said, clicking to the next slide, was stolen." The word hung in the air like a detonation. I heard gasps, felt shock ripple through the auditorium like a wave hitting the shore. The slide displayed bank statements, highlighted transactions, dates, amounts, transfers into personal accounts, payments to luxury retailers, vacation charges. Everything Patricia had uncovered. "How dare you?" Veronica hissed, stepping toward me. I ignored her. "These statements show exactly how donor money was used, not for children, but for personal expenditures. Vacations, designer goods, private loans." The gasps grew louder. People leaned forward. Some covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Robert stepped towards me, then his face red, his jaw clenched. "Turn that off," he barked. "This is slander. Get off the stage." Security guards, alerted by the tension, began approaching the front. But I kept my focus on the audience. Dozens of families donated to this fund, believing they were helping children in need. They were lied to. They were deceived. Their generosity was weaponized. I clicked to another slide screenshots of forged receipts, backdated entries, fabricated donation logs. Veronica lunged for the laptop then, but the AV technician stepped between us, shaking his head. "Ma'am, you need to step back." She rounded on him, face contorted. "Stop this presentation. Stop it right now." But the screen kept glowing with truth. Behind her, Robert moved faster than I expected, charging toward me with blind fury, reaching to grab the microphone from my hand. He never made it. Security intercepted him mid-stride, catching him by the arms as he shouted, "This is lies! She's mentally unstable! She's trying to destroy us!" I looked directly into the audience and spoke over his shouting. And that's not all. The room had erupted into noise, shouting, gasping, murmuring as Robert strained against the security officers holding him back. Veronica shrieked something indistinguishable, her voice cracking under the strain. Dominic barked orders at no one, demanding that someone shut this down. Isabella stood frozen near the edge of the stage, her hands clasped tightly, her face drained of color. But I remained anchored in the center of it all, the eye of a storm I had anticipated with absolute clarity. I lifted the microphone and began again, projecting my voice above the chaos. What you've seen so far represents only a fraction of the evidence. The audience began to quiet. Their attention shifted not to the flailing members of my family, but to me, to the screen behind me, to the truth unspooling in real time. I clicked to the next slide. "This," I said, pointing, "is the Rivera Children's Fund Form 990 for last year. The charity reported 85% of donations as operating expenses." A donor near the front frowned. He whispered something to his wife. I continued, letting my voice remain calm, almost clinical. Charities of this size typically report less than 20% in overhead. This number alone is a massive red flag. But the truth is even worse. I clicked again. The next slide displayed a series of credit card statements, each with glaring highlights in bold red. These are purchases made on the charity's credit card. $280 spent at a toy store for the staged photos you saw earlier. I paused, then clicked again. $12,000 for a Rolex. A murmur swept the room. $8,000 for designer handbags. Another click. $35,000 for a down payment on a luxury vehicle. Gasps, sharp breaths, angry whispers. I could see Mrs. Patterson in the third row, white hair, small frame, watching with wide, wet eyes. She clutched her purse with trembling hands. I felt my voice soften as I recited the next part. These are not clerical errors. They are not mistakes. They represent deliberate misuse of community donations for personal gain. Veronica screamed, "She's lying! She's mentally ill! She needs help!" But her voice, shrill and cracking, could not compete with the projected evidence. I didn't look at her. Not yet. Instead, I brought up the next slide. This is the charity's website. Every photo of children's stock images, purchased online. None of the children shown were recipients of any assistance. The room shifted palpably. Confusion was giving way to anger, betrayal, disbelief turning into realization. And here I said, bringing up another section, are the testimonials used in promotional materials, not parents, actors, paid through a local casting agency. Someone in the back cried out in disgust. "Many of you here tonight donated," I said, finally letting emotion enter my voice. "You believed you were helping children. You believed in my family." I paused, letting that settle. Then Mrs. Patterson stood. Tears streamed down her face. She swallowed hard, trying to speak, but her voice cracked too much to form words. She pressed a hand to her heart and sank slowly back into her seat as people around her reached out in comfort. The sight of her nearly broke me, but I steadied myself. This moment was for her, especially for her. Once the room quieted again, I clicked to a new slide. And now I said softly, but clearly, "You deserve to know the rest." I brought up an image of the original 1987 property deed, The house my parents have been living in for over 30 years is not theirs. It never has been. I enlarged the document, highlighting my grandmother's name. My grandmother, Margaret Rivera, bought that house with her own money before my parents were married. She allowed them to live there, but she never transferred ownership. Ever. There were murmurs of disbelief. People glanced toward Veronica, whose face had gone the color of chalk. She shook her head violently, mouthing the word no. When my grandmother passed, she left the house to me. Directly. Legally. Unambiguously. I displayed the will, my grandmother's signature, the notarization stamp, the probate filing. My parents have been claiming ownership of this property. They have told neighbors, friends, even financial institutions that the home belongs to them. They have taken out loans using it as collateral. A man in the audience spoke loudly. "That's illegal." "Yes," I replied. "It is. Fraudulent misrepresentation to secure loans. And they signed documents to do it." Veronica stumbled forward, then grabbing at the microphone cord, her face contorted with fury. That will was forged. She wasn't in her right mind. She was... I cut her off, not with anger, but with evidence. "This is a letter from my grandmother's physician." I clicked to the next slide. It certifies in writing that she was of sound mind at the time her will was executed. The audience erupted into stunned murmurs. A few people clapped once, sharply, not in approval, but in bitter acknowledgement of truth. Veronica's knees buckled slightly. She clutched the edge of the podium, her breathing ragged. I lowered the microphone for a moment and looked out at the faces before me, not as an accuser, but as someone who owed them honesty. "I want to explain why I'm doing this," I said, my voice quieting the room. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because 47 families trusted my parents. You trusted them with your money, your hopes, your generosity, and they betrayed you." I scanned the rows, meeting eyes where I could. "I have already submitted reports to the IRS and the State Attorney General. Every document you've seen tonight and many more has been provided to authorities. There will be a full investigation." A woman near the front wiped her eyes. Another man shook his head slowly. Disbelief etched deep into his features. My grandmother. I continued, steadying my breath, spent the final years of her life gathering evidence, documenting lies, recording what she saw. She knew someday I would need the truth to finally free myself from the cycle of manipulation and abuse that defined my childhood. My voice broke slightly, but I pressed on. "I'm doing this for her, and for all of you." Silence. Heavy emotional waiting. Then someone began clapping. Another person joined, and then more. The applause built not for spectacle but for truth, for exposure, for the courage to face what had been hidden too long. Behind me, Veronica collapsed into a chair left on stage, sobbing uncontrollably. Robert's face twisted with hatred, his body straining against security officers, as though he could tear himself free through sheer rage. Dominic stood stiffly, jaw clenched, eyes darting as if searching for someone to blame besides himself. Just when I thought the room couldn't hold any more tension, a new sound entered the space. The doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Uniformed police officers stepped inside. A ripple went through the crowd. Fear, shock, curiosity. The officers moved with purpose down the aisle toward the stage. Veronica's sobbing turned into a wail. Robert's face shifted from rage to something that looked like panic, but darker, and the officers kept approaching. The police officers reached the edge of the stage just as the room hung in a stunned, fragile silence, broken only by Veronica's ragged sobs and Robert's hoarse attempts to shout over the noise. One officer stepped toward me first, his voice calm but alert. "Ma'am, we received a report of a disturbance. Can you tell us what's happening?" Before I could answer, a man from the audience shouted, "It's fraud! She just exposed them for stealing hundreds of thousands from a charity." Another yelled, "Arrest them!" The officers exchanged looks, confused at first, then sharply attentive. One gestured for backup on his radio. "I'd like to speak with the coordinator of this event," the second officer said. But before the MC could approach the journalists I had alerted earlier, surged forward phones raised already recording. One of them called out, "Jordan, can we get a statement? Is it true you filed reports with the IRS?" Another asked, "How long has the fraud been happening?" Marcus materialized at my side with the precision of someone trained for moments just like this. "Ms. Rivera will not be giving verbal statements tonight," he announced, stepping between me and the journalists. "Please take these." He handed each of them a folder containing a written summary of the findings, my prepared statement, and the contact number for tomorrow's press conference. "All questions will be answered then." "Thank you." His voice was firm, polished, unshakable. The journalists understood this was not the moment for a confrontation they had already captured enough. They stepped back, still recording, still speaking into their microphones for their outlets. The air buzzed with the unfiltered hum of scandal breaking wide open. I turned. Chaos had erupted around my parents. Several donors had surrounded them, bristling with anger. An elderly man dressed in a suit that looked carefully chosen for this event pointed a shaking finger at Veronica. "You told me," he said, voice-breaking, "you told me the money would help sick children. My grandson needed surgery. I gave you $10,000? I gave it to you instead of putting it toward his hospital bills." Veronica sobbed, reaching out blindly. "It's not what you think, please, please, there's more to this." But the man snapped. "There's nothing else I need to understand." Next to him, a woman folded her arms tightly. "I donated $5,000 for school supplies. You bought handbags with it." Robert tried to raise his hands in a calming gesture. "Everyone. Please, let's not jump to conclusions. There's been a misunderstanding." "No," another donor cut in sharply. "We saw the bank statements. We saw everything." A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd like embers catching flame. As security tried to separate the growing circle around my parents, I stepped away from the center of the stage. The air felt heavy and warm, thick with betrayal and disbelief. I needed space. I needed one breath that wasn't steeped in the fumes of my family's destruction. I turned and nearly collided with Isabella. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara, her eyeliner blurred into smudges that aged her years and minutes. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, her hands trembled at her sides. "Jordan," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at her, searching her expression for the truth behind the apology. For once, I didn't sense calculation, only fear and shame. "You knew they were bad." I said, my voice softer than I expected, "but you didn't know it was this bad." She nodded, tears spilling anew. "I didn't. I swear I didn't. Mom kept me away from anything involving the money. She only had me sign forms telling me it was just paperwork. I didn't ask questions. I should have asked questions." Her words rambled, rushed, panicked. She looked like a child on the verge of drowning. "I know my name is on some of those documents," she choked. I didn't understand what they meant. I never saw a single dollar. I know that doesn't make me innocent. I studied her carefully. Isabella had been complicit in my emotional mistreatment for years. But this wasn't about the emotional manipulation anymore. This was about criminal behavior, and criminal behavior demanded accountability. If you're serious about changing, I told her, you will cooperate with the investigation. Completely. No protecting them, no lies. Her eyes widened with something like relief. I will. I promise. I'll tell the investigators everything I know. Behind us, Dominic tried to slip toward the side exit, his head ducked low, his posture tight. Before he could escape, a journalist blocked his path. They raised a microphone camera, rolling. Dominic, can you comment on the allegations? Did you personally benefit from charity funds? His jaw clenched. No comment. This is slander. He pushed past them, but the damage was done. That clip would circulate within hours, painting him as defensive and guilty. I turned away and gathered my laptop and documents, slipping them back into my bag. My body felt both heavy and strangely weightless, as if adrenaline were the only thing still holding me upright. As I stepped toward the exit, a familiar voice called my name. Dorothy Walsh reached me, her small frame moving quickly despite the crowd. She wrapped me in a tight embrace before I could even speak. I melted into her arms, letting myself be held for one moment, one brief, forgiving moment. "Your grandmother is smiling down on you," she murmured. "You were magnificent." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle into the cracks of every old wound. But there was no triumph in my chest, no rush of victory, only quiet sadness. Sadness for the people who had been deceived. Sadness for the grandmother who had carried the burden alone for years. Sadness for the family that chose destruction over decency. I thanked Dorothy softly, then stepped away, making my way toward the exit. The cool night air hit my skin like a baptism. I inhaled deeply, savoring the fresh oxygen after hours in a suffocating room. Across the parking lot, I saw Veronica hunched over in the passenger seat of their car, while Robert stood outside shouting at one of the reporters who had followed him out. He looked enraged, but powerless, like a man watching his kingdom burn with no water left to fight the flames. A flicker of pity stirred in me, a small ember of empathy conditioned over years. But then my mind flashed with images, torn childhood photos, years of emotional neglect, exploitation of donors, the lies, the cruelty. The pity evaporated entirely. I slid into my car, locked the doors, and sat silently for a few moments, grounding myself. Then I drove home without turning on the radio. My phone buzzed relentlessly in my bag, calls, texts, notifications, no doubt piling up by the minute. I ignored them all. When I finally reached my apartment, I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the couch. For the first time since the ordeal began, tears spilled freely down my face, not from sorrow, but from release. Relief. Exhaustion. Closure. I cried until the tension in my body unwound, until my breathing steadied, until my mind felt still. When I finally fell asleep, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my blinds, warm against my face. I reached for my phone out of habit, expecting maybe a handful of messages. Instead, the screen lit up with a flood of alerts. 147 notifications, breaking news banners, missed calls from unknown numbers, text messages from journalists, acquaintances, even strangers. And then at the top of the screen, a trending hashtag displayed across my social feed. Below is Part 18, the media firestorm written exactly to your specifications. First-person POV, 1,300 to 1,400 words. Smooth continuation from Part 17. No repetition. One continuous narrative. No icons. Ends with the required cliffhanger. When I finally opened my eyes the next morning, sunlight filtered through my blinds and soft gold streaks warming my skin and momentarily making me forget the chaos of the night before. For a few seconds, I floated in that quiet space between sleep and waking until the vibrating hum of my phone on the nightstand pulled me sharply into reality. 147 notifications. It took me a moment just to register the number. Messages, missed calls, alerts, emails. I unlocked the screen and felt the breath leave my body. My name was everywhere. A banner from a local news station flashed across the top of the screen, "Local charity fraud exposed by whistleblower daughter." Another station posted, "Rivera charity collapse daughter reveals." Evidence of massive fraud. The thumbnail showed me standing on stage, my arm extended toward the projector screen, my face unnervingly calm as my family unraveled behind me. Someone had uploaded a full video of my presentation. It already had over 500,000 views. Comments poured beneath it faster than I could scroll. Some people praised my courage. Others questioned my motives. But as more journalists began to analyze the evidence, screenshots, tax returns, bank statements, doubt evaporated like morning mist. I set the phone down, but it buzzed again immediately. Twitter was a wildfire, multiple hashtags trending, most prominently. But there were detractors, too. People accusing me of airing dirty laundry or humiliating my own family. They didn't last long. Evidence has a way of silencing speculation. One Reddit thread caught my eye. The Rivera family scammed my grandmother out of $5,000. 10,000 comments followed it, people sharing their stories one after another. 47 families in total, just as Patricia had told me, recounting how they had trusted my parents with their savings insurance payouts, retirement funds. Each story punched the air out of my lungs a little more. A local newspaper had published an editorial titled, "How Did This Fraud Go Unnoticed for 5 Years?" The editor wrote with a fury I felt in my bones, questioning the lack of oversight, the blind trust placed in charismatic liars, and the courage it took for someone inside the family to speak out. I wasn't sure I felt courageous. I mostly felt hollow, like my body was still catching up with everything that had happened. I forced myself to sit up, stretching my stiff muscles. Coffee, I thought. Coffee and focus. As I moved through my kitchen, my phone buzzed with a different kind of notification emails. Hundreds of emails. I opened the first one. A woman wrote that she had donated $2,000 because she believed it would buy clothing for children in foster care. Another said she skipped her own medical treatment to donate $3,000. A grandmother wrote that she had used her Social Security checks to give monthly to the charity because my mother's speeches had moved her so deeply. Each message thanked me for exposing the truth, even though the truth hurt. One email nearly undid me. Dear Jordan, my name is Sarah. I'm 62. My late husband worked double shifts for 6 months so we could donate $8,000 to the Rivera Children's Fund. Your mother told us it would provide an entire classroom with school supplies. My husband died 3 months later, believing he made a difference. Learning the truth breaks my heart, but thank you for giving me closure. He deserved to know his intentions mattered even if your parents betrayed them. I pressed a hand to my mouth. Tears pricked my eyes. Not from grief, but from the weight of responsibility, the gravity of what people had entrusted to my family. This is why I did it, I whispered to no one. Marcus arrived an hour later to prepare me for the press conference. He adjusted the collar of my blazer, handed me a water bottle, and repeated his mantra, "Stay steady. Stay factual. Let them see your integrity." Outside my attorney's office, a crowd of reporters and photographers waited. Flashbulbs burst as soon as I stepped out. Marcus guided me to the podium where I unfolded the prepared statement. I take no pleasure in exposing my family's crimes, I read, projecting my voice with clarity, but I could not allow innocent people to continue being defrauded. My grandmother spent years documenting their dishonesty because she knew someone would need to hold them accountable. I paused, letting the room breathe. I will be establishing the Margaret Rivera Memorial Fund, managed by an independent nonprofit with transparent accounting. Its purpose will be to serve the children my family claimed to help, but never did. I didn't take questions. I simply nodded, stepped away, and let Marcus conclude the event. It felt surreal to see microphones pointed at me, cameras tracking my every movement, reporters shouting my name as though I were some kind of public figure instead of someone who had finally painfully told the truth. By midday, the video of my statement had aired on every local news channel and several national ones. Comments flooded social media, people calling me brave, calling for prosecution, demanding justice. It was validating. It was overwhelming. It was bittersweet. By evening, when I finally returned home, I felt an exhaustion deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag on the floor, and leaned back against the door, exhaling slowly. It was over. Not completely legal proceedings would come, charges would be filed, news cycles would continue. But the reveal, the hardest part, was behind me. Or so I thought. Just as I walked toward the kitchen, my doorbell rang. I hesitated. It was almost 8 o'clock. I wasn't expecting anyone. A sense of unease rippled through me, but I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. My breath hitched. Isabella stood there clutching a suitcase, her shoulders trembling, her mascara smeared down her cheeks. She looked small, defeated, broken in a way I had never seen. I opened the door slowly. She burst into tears. "Jordan," she choked out. "I can't go back there. Please. Can I stay with you?" For a moment, I just stood there with the door half open, staring at Isabella, as though she were a ghost from a life I'd tried to bury. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, her mascara smeared into dark streaks that made her look younger, almost childlike. She clutched a single suitcase so tightly her knuckles were bloodless. The version of her I'd always known, polished, elegant, performative, was gone. What remained was someone stripped bare. "Jordan," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "Please. I can't go back there." A wave of conflicting emotions crashed into me: anger, pity, distrust, protectiveness. I hadn't invited her into my life. I hadn't prepared for this. And yet here she was, trembling in the doorway like someone fleeing a disaster. "Come in," I said, finally stepping aside. She exhaled a shuddered breath and stumbled inside, setting her suitcase on the floor. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She looked around my apartment, the clean lines, the quiet elegance, the evidence of a life lived independently, and something broke in her expression. Maybe envy. Maybe grief. Maybe realization. "I'm so sorry," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. "They're turning on me, Jordan. Both of them. Mom said it was my fault you acted out. Dad kept yelling that I should have convinced you not to come to the ceremony. They're saying I betrayed them." My jaw tightened. "That's what they do, Isabella. When they lose control, they look for someone else to punish." She nodded with a small, broken laugh. "I should have known. I should have expected it. But I didn't. Dominic texted me calling me a traitor, saying I chose the wrong side because I didn't run out with them. He said the investigators are going to blame me because my name is on paperwork." She pulled out her phone and handed it to me. The texts were vicious. Dominic's anger was unhinged. Threats to expose her, accusations that she'd ruined their family, demands that she lie to reporters on their behalf. The same brother who mocked her behind her back was now tearing her apart in writing. "Jordan," she whispered, "I don't have any money. I don't have anywhere to go. Everything I have came from them. And they've already told me they're cutting me off. They took my cards. I don't even have my car." My heart twisted, not out of affection, but out of recognition. I knew what being stripped of security felt like. I had lived it. She looked at me with pure fear. "I'm scared, Jordan. I'm scared they'll pin everything on me. I signed things because they told me to. I didn't understand what they were. I was stupid and naive, and I didn't know." I inhaled slowly. I'd imagined this moment before, but never like this. Never with her trembling in front of me, begging for help. Part of me wanted to slam the door on her and let her fend for herself. Another part, quieter, older, shaped by my grandmother, knew I couldn't abandon her while she was breaking free. "You can stay tonight," I said finally. "But we need boundaries." Relief washed over her so visibly she nearly collapsed into the chair behind her. She nodded quickly. "Anything. I'll follow any rules. Just, thank you." I didn't answer. I moved to the kitchen and put on water for tea, trying to steady my thoughts. When we sat down at the dining table, I folded my hands and met her eyes. "There are conditions," I said. "If you stay here, you cooperate fully with authorities. No protecting them. No half-truths." She nodded vigorously. "I will, I swear. I'll tell them everything." "You also need therapy," I continued. "Real therapy. You've been trapped in their control for so long you don't even realize how deep it goes." To my surprise, she didn't argue. She just stared into her mug eyes, glassy. I know something's wrong with me. I haven't been okay for a long time." Silence stretched between us until she whispered, "I've been bulimic for 8 years." My chest tightened. Mom always said I was one bad month away from ruining my face, from getting fat, from embarrassing the family. I spent years trying to stay small enough to make her happy. Her voice shook. I haven't had a real friend since high school. Mom said other girls would be jealous, so I shouldn't trust them. She said boys liked me only because of how I looked. I started believing her. Now I can't even make decisions without thinking, what would Mom say? I don't know who I am, Jordan. She broke the sentence with a sob so small it barely escaped. I sat back, absorbing her confession. The years of privilege she'd flaunted were real, but so was the cage she'd lived in. Veronica hadn't just punished me, she'd shaped Isabella into the perfect puppet-trading comfort for compliance. That didn't excuse her complicity in my suffering, but it colored it, added layers I had never bothered to see. I'm not promising forgiveness, I said softly. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I'm willing to give you a chance to prove you can change. And if you cross one boundary, one lie, one manipulation, you're out. She nodded as tears dripped into her tea. I understand. And thank you. We talked for another hour, mostly in cautious fragments. She was exhausted emotionally and physically. When she finally curled up on my couch under a spare blanket, her breathing uneven but slowly settling, I watched her for a moment. This wasn't the sister who rolled her eyes at me during holidays. This wasn't the girl who accidentally embarrassed me in front of relatives. This was someone cracked open, frightened, disoriented, stripped of her illusions. I turned off the lights and went to my room, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed every memory childhood moments where Isabella parroted Veronica's cruelty, the times she'd whispered criticisms behind my back, the years she'd lived comfortably while I clawed for independence. But then I remembered Dorothy's words, breaking the cycle means offering others the escape route you wished someone had offered you. I didn't owe Isabella salvation, but I could offer her a path forward. Forgiveness was another matter. Forgiveness would have to be earned. I finally drifted into a restless sleep, unsure if I'd made the right choice. The next morning, just as dawn light reached my window, my phone buzzed. I rubbed my eyes and answered groggily. Hello, Jordan. My attorney's voice said, calm but weighted with urgency, the IRS has officially launched a formal investigation. I sat up straighter. Good. That was expected. There's something else. He continued. Your parents filed a lawsuit against you late last night. Defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They're asking for $2 million in damages. My breath froze in my chest as the words sank in. Of course they did. Of course they weren't done fighting. And I realized as the morning sun spilled over my room that the war my grandmother had predicted wasn't over yet. It was only shifting into its next phase. When I hung up the phone with Howard, I stayed sitting on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the wall as his words echoed in my mind. My parents were suing me for $2 million as though the damage I had inflicted on them outweighed the lives they had damaged for years. Even after everything had been exposed, even after the charity donors began stepping forward in droves, even after investigators intervened, they still believed they were the victims. Still convinced the world should bend to their narrative. I wasn't shocked, but I was tired, deep bone level tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes not from fighting one great battle, but from realizing the war is far from over. I rubbed my temples and tried to steady my breath before walking into the living room where Isabella sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the muted morning news. The headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, Rivera Scandal, Expands Lawsuit Filed Against Whistleblower Daughter. She flinched when she saw me. Is it true, she whispered. Are they really suing you? Yes, I said, for defamation and emotional distress. She closed her eyes. They've lost their minds. No, I corrected gently. They're being exactly who they've always been. Howard called again 10 minutes later, and I put him on speaker so Isabella could hear because now, whether she liked it or not, she was part of this. He explained the situation calmly, as he always did. This lawsuit is baseless. Truth is an absolute defense in defamation cases, and your documentation is airtight. They're trying to intimidate you into silence. If we file an immediate motion to dismiss, the court will almost certainly throw this out. I felt a flicker of relief. So I don't have to worry? Oh, you need to worry a little, he said in that brutally honest way I'd come to respect. Even a stupid lawsuit costs time and money. They know that. It's a pressure tactic. But ironically, by filing it, they've created more public records we can use against them later. Meaning I said they're digging themselves deeper. Exactly. They're handing prosecutors more evidence of their pattern of dishonesty. Then file everything we need to, I said. I'm done being intimidated. I meant it. Something in me hardened. Not cruelty, not spite, but resolve. The kind my grandmother must have cultivated during her final years while preparing that USB. I understood her now. The desire not to harm them, but to hold the line at last. If my parents wanted to wage war through the courts, I could play that game too. Except I didn't need tricks. I had truth. When the news broke about the lawsuit, the backlash was immediate and ferocious. Social media exploded in disbelief and anger. People who had donated their savings to the charity were furious not just at being lied to, but at the gall of my parents suing the one person who had told the truth. Comments poured in. So they steal $266K and sue the whistleblower. Lock them up already. She exposes a massive fraud and they sue her. These people have no shame. The local newspaper's editorial board wrote an article titled "Rivera Parents' Lawsuit Shows Shameless Entitlement," and for once public sentiment aligned entirely with reason. Even people who had previously criticized me for airing family drama publicly now retracted their comments. Facts have a way of cutting through noise. Then something I hadn't expected happened. A group of donors launched a crowdfunding campaign to assist Jordan with legal fees. They raised $45,000 in 3 days. I couldn't take the money, it didn't feel right, but the gesture moved me deeply. I donated the entire amount directly to the Margaret Rivera Memorial Fund and announced it publicly. The response was overwhelming. People wrote messages thanking me for honoring my grandmother's name. Some even offered to volunteer for the fund. Meanwhile, Veronica and Robert's lives were collapsing in real time. The gym they'd been members of for 20 years canceled their membership, citing reputational concerns. Their country club revoked theirs outright. Neighbors who once admired them now crossed the street to avoid being seen with them. Someone posted a photo of their house online with the caption, "Fraud lives here," though the irony was that the house legally belonged to me. Donors filed their own lawsuits to reclaim what was stolen. Some were for small amounts, $500 to $1,000. Others were significant, $15,000 from a local business owner, $8,000 from the widow whose email still haunted me. Watching their names appear on legal documents made my chest ache with sadness and fury. These people deserved justice far more than I deserved peace. And then the criminal investigation intensified. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division moved swiftly, faster than even Howard expected. Within 2 weeks of the ceremony, federal agents executed a search warrant on the Rivera house. They called me beforehand because, as the legal property owner, I needed to authorize entry. I signed the paperwork without hesitation. It still stunned me how symbolic that moment was, granting investigators permission to search the house I'd grown up in, the one my mother had always weaponized as leverage. I had spent decades believing I was a guest in that home when I was in fact the rightful heir. Agents seized computers, financial ledgers, paperwork from my parents' desks, anything that could establish a trail. They photographed every room and boxed up documents. Veronica apparently had a full meltdown when they arrived. Robert tried to argue, but quickly realized federal agents weren't interested in his opinions. Dominic didn't fare much better. He was formally interviewed by investigators, and according to Isabella, who heard from extended relatives, he completely unraveled under pressure. He contradicted himself repeatedly, provided timelines that made no sense, and tried to blame everything on accounting misunderstandings. Investigators reportedly left the interview shaking their heads. Meanwhile, Veronica and Robert hired expensive defense attorneys, far more expensive than they could reasonably afford. They drained their accounts quickly, selling jewelry, cashing out retirement funds, liquidating anything of value. All to fight a losing battle, all to avoid admitting the truth. And the truth was multiplying. Investigators discovered more fraud than anyone anticipated. The charity had been used to launder income from Robert's under-the-table side business, more than $100,000 of unreported income. They uncovered forged signatures on documents tied to the charity's bank account. They identified wire fraud patterns across multiple years. Every new revelation was a fresh blow. Every revelation made my stomach churn. This wasn't just financial misconduct. It was systematic, sustained deceit, woven through nearly every aspect of their lives. The more I learned, the more I realized my parents weren't spiraling into error recently. They had been climbing a mountain of lies for years, possibly decades. I just happened to be the person who finally knocked the structure down. 2 weeks after investigators raided the house, Howard called again. "Jordan, the State Fraud Division wants to coordinate with IRS CID. They're building a joint case." "What does that mean?" I asked, bracing myself. "It means this is no longer a question of if they'll be prosecuted, only when and for how long." I closed my eyes. I wasn't happy. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even relieved. I just felt the weight of inevitability settle into my bones. 3 more weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, press statements, updates from investigators, and long conversations with Isabella as she began therapy and slowly unraveled her own conditioning. She was making progress, painfully slowly, but progress nonetheless. I wasn't ready to call her trustworthy, but I no longer flinched at her presence. Then 6 weeks after the ceremony, I received a letter in my mailbox. It was stamped with the seal of the United States District Court. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside, printed in stark black ink, "United States of America, Veronica Rivera and Robert Rivera criminal trial. Set for 3 months from today." I read it twice. Then a third time. It was happening. And it wasn't going to end quietly. 6 months passed in a way that felt both impossibly fast and painfully slow, as though time itself didn't quite know what to do with me now that the wildfire of public scandal had burned down to embers. My life didn't snap back into place. It settled carefully, piece by piece, into something quieter and sturdier than before. I had expected to feel triumphant after dismantling the world I grew up in, but the reality was softer, more human. It felt like waking from a long, chaotic storm into a morning that was neither bright nor dark, just open. Isabella was still living with me, though our relationship existed in a careful, cautious balance. She attended therapy twice a week and had even started working part-time at a community nonprofit, filing paperwork and helping with outreach. The job didn't pay much, but she treated it like an atonement, a way to give back to a world she had once unknowingly helped harm. Sometimes she talked about her sessions with her therapist. Sometimes she didn't. I didn't push. Healing wasn't a race. As for the Margaret Rivera Memorial Fund, it had grown beyond anything I imagined. With help from a board of independent advisors, we had already provided assistance to 15 local families, tutoring programs, school supplies, college application fees, after-school support. Real people, real results. Every time I saw a child wearing a backpack purchased by the fund, or a mother wiping away grateful tears, I felt something inside me loosen, as though my grandmother's love had finally found its purpose in the world. The media attention had quieted to a low hum. I still did occasional interviews about charity oversight and nonprofit fraud, but most days were blissfully ordinary. Coffee in the morning, work during the day, quiet evenings. Sometimes Dorothy joined me for dinner, telling stories about my grandmother that still made me laugh. Sometimes Isabella and I watched old movies on silent nights. But beneath all of it, just out of reach, was the awareness that the trial was coming. And now it had arrived. The courthouse was colder than I remembered from my one previous visit months ago when I had met with prosecutors. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as I sat in the public gallery beside Dorothy and Howard Mills. I felt strangely detached, as though I were watching someone else's story unfold. After months of motions hearings and disclosures, the criminal trial felt like a formality. The world already knew the truth. Still, my palms were slightly damp as the judge entered and everyone rose. Her voice rang through the courtroom, measured and confident. The prosecution began its opening statement, and the trial was officially underway. For the next 2 weeks, I sat through every minute of testimony. The prosecution's case was devastating, not because it surprised me, but because it was so thorough it left no oxygen for doubt. Patricia Brennan, the forensic accountant I'd hired, took the stand and walked the jury through 2 years of documented financial misconduct. Fraudulent transfers, fabricated receipts, donor deception, laundered income and expenditures that made the jury visibly shift in their seats. When she presented the timeline showing donation deposits followed minutes later by large personal withdrawals, the jurors' faces hardened with disgust. Donors testified next. Some were nervous, some were angry, some were heartbreakingly gentle. One elderly woman's voice broke as she explained how she'd donated her late husband's life insurance. A single father described skipping medical treatment so he could give money to children who needed it more. A local business owner told the court he'd trusted my parents because they seemed like a good family. Hearing their stories in person was harder than I expected. I had to keep my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. Dorothy occasionally reached over and gave my wrist a reassuring squeeze. The defense's argument was weak, an anemic attempt to frame everything as poor bookkeeping rather than intentional criminal activity. Their strategy worsened when Veronica took the stand. She alternated wildly between portraying herself as an overwhelmed martyr and launching personal attacks against me. At one point, she claimed I had always been jealous, vindictive, and emotionally unstable, which earned a raised eyebrow from the judge. But her performance collapsed completely when the prosecutor introduced a portion of Margaret's video testimony. Hearing my grandmother's calm, heartbroken voice describing Veronica's decades of cruelty silenced the courtroom. Veronica visibly paled. She tried to argue that the video was manipulated, but the prosecutor immediately produced the metadata verifying its authenticity. She had no answer. Robert chose not to testify at all, and that silence spoke louder than any excuse he might have given. His attorneys looked tense, exhausted, and increasingly resigned. Dominic, faced with his own set of charges, refused an early plea deal in what I assumed was an attempt to preserve some warped sense of familial loyalty. But as the evidence against him mounted his luxury purchases, his involvement in the charity's finances, his threatening communications, he grew visibly agitated. Eventually, on the second-to-last day of the trial, he decided to cooperate. His testimony came too late to save him, but it reduced his potential sentence significantly. Isabella never took the stand. She was not charged, and prosecutors confirmed that her cooperation early in the investigation protected her from legal consequences. She attended one session of the trial, but became so distressed she couldn't return. I didn't force the issue. She was carrying enough. When both sides rested, the jury was dismissed for deliberation. I expected a long wait, but 4 hours later we were summoned back to the courtroom. I held Dorothy's hand. It was warm, steady. The jury foreman stood, his expression solemn. We find the defendant Veronica Rivera guilty on all counts. We find the defendant Robert Rivera guilty on all counts. The words were decisive, sharp, and final. 2 weeks later, the sentencing hearing unfolded with a gravity that felt like the closing of a book written over 35 painful years. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and clear, penetrating eyes, delivered her ruling with a voice that carried both authority and disappointment. You exploited the generosity of hardworking people who trusted you to help children. You betrayed that trust for luxury goods and vacations. The harm you caused financially, emotionally, and morally is profound. This court finds your conduct reprehensible. Veronica sobbed as the judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison. Robert received 6 years, slightly reduced because of his later cooperation, but still significant. They were ordered to pay $280,000 in restitution, plus penalties, effectively ensuring they would never recover financially. Dominic received a suspended sentence, 3 years probation, and 500 hours of community service. I wondered if he would ever truly understand the depth of what he'd done. Isabella, sitting beside me, kept her eyes fixed on her lap, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. When Veronica was led away in handcuffs, she turned once to look at me. Her expression held desperation, anger, and bewilderment, as though she still couldn't understand how the world had stopped accepting her version of reality. I felt nothing. No triumph, no sadness, just a quiet closing of a long, long chapter. After the hearing, people began to spill out of the courtroom: prosecutors, reporters, donors, attorneys. I walked outside, letting the crisp air settle into my lungs. Dorothy walked with me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "Justice did it," I corrected. "I just told the truth." We stepped onto the courthouse steps, sunlight warming the concrete. I felt the first real sense of peace I'd experienced in years. Then, I heard a voice behind me. "Ms. Rivera." I turned to see a middle-aged woman approaching cautiously. She wore simple clothes, carried a worn leather bag, and held something wrapped in a white envelope clutched to her chest. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice gentle. "My name is Linda Porter. I was your grandmother's private nurse during her final months. She asked me to give you something, but only after the trial was over." My heartbeat stumbled. "What is it?" I whispered. She held out the envelope. She said it would explain everything. I stared at the woman for a long moment, the sounds of the courthouse fading into a low hum behind me. It felt strange that after months of relentless legal battles, public scrutiny, and emotional unraveling, everything suddenly narrowed to this one quiet moment on the courthouse steps. The woman, Linda Porter, she'd said, held the envelope with both hands, as if it were something fragile, something sacred. And in a way it was. I could feel it before I even touched it. My grandmother's handwriting on the front stirred a hollow ache deep in my chest. "For Jordan, after justice is served." Justice. Those words had haunted me for months, shaping every decision, every step. Now that the trial was over, the verdicts delivered, and my parents sentenced, I found myself suspended between what had been and what could be. Linda stepped closer, her voice low and warm in the cool morning air. "She waited for this moment," she said. "Your grandmother believed in you, Jordan. She knew you'd do what needed to be done." I swallowed hard, accepting the envelope with trembling fingers. Her handwriting was as familiar to me as the scent of her perfume, the softness of her hugs, the cadence of her voice when she told me bedtime stories. My eyes burned as I ran a thumb over the looping letters. For a second, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Linda watched me with quiet patience. "She talked about you constantly," she said. "She worried for you, but she never doubted your strength. She wanted you to have this when everything was settled, when the truth finally stood on its own." I nodded and slowly slid my finger under the sealed flap. The paper tore softly. Inside was a folded letter, cream stationery, written entirely in her flowing script. I unfolded it carefully, my hands trembling. As the first words came into view, my breath caught. "My dearest Jordan, if you're reading this, it means you've found the truth and fought for yourself. And my darling girl, I am so proud of you." The words blurred for a moment as tears filled my eyes. I blinked hard and kept reading. "I want you to know that watching you grow into a strong, kind woman, despite your mother's cruelty, has been the greatest joy of my life. You were never the problem, sweetheart. You were always the light. I wish I could have protected you more overtly, but circumstances made that impossible. Still, I never stopped loving you, not for one moment." I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth to stifle a sob. I wasn't expecting this, not after so much turmoil, so much loss. Reading her voice on the page was like hearing her again, soft and steady, sitting beside me while brushing my hair, telling me stories about resilience and hope. "Jordan." The letter continued. "I know the temptation will be to hold on to anger, to let what they did shape you. But my darling, please don't let their toxicity rent space in your heart forever. You've taken back your power now, use it to build something beautiful. The world around me seemed to quiet the courthouse steps beneath my feet, grounding me as the words wrapped around me like a balm for wounds I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. The house is yours. The money is yours. But more importantly, your life is yours. Don't spend it looking backward at them. Spend it looking forward to everything you deserve. Love, peace, joy, and a family of your choosing. My breath trembled. My grandmother had always spoken of healing as something you choose, not something that happens on its own. I realized how long I had been stuck in survival mode. How long I had carried the weight of their cruelty like a chain I believed belonged to me. Breaking free from toxic people isn't selfish, it's survival, she wrote. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply walk away and build a better life. You have that chance now. Take it. A tear slipped down my cheek and splashed onto the page. I wiped it quickly as though afraid of blurring her words. She had written so much more. She spoke about believing in me, about wanting me to embrace joy without guilt, about trusting myself even when others tried to diminish me. With each line, I felt pieces of the heaviness inside me loosen. Then the final paragraph struck me hardest. You were my hope, Jordan, my heart. I didn't want to leave this world without giving you everything you needed to be free. If I had one wish in my final days, it was that you would one day realize how worthy you've always been. Go live the life you were meant for. Go choose happiness. And whenever you doubt yourself, remember this: I loved you more than I ever found the words to say. I folded the letter, gently pressing it to my chest as the tears finally fell. Not messy, not loud, just quiet streams of release. Dorothy placed a supportive hand on my back, and Linda stood respectfully nearby, giving me space, but staying close as though she understood that grief and comfort sometimes needed to coexist. After a long moment, Linda cleared her throat softly. There's something else, she said. Your grandmother gave me one more item to deliver when the time was right. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. The deep burgundy color faded from time. I recognized it instantly. My grandmother used to keep her jewelry in a similar pouch, always tucked safely in her dresser drawer. My breath caught as Linda placed it in my hand. She said this would help you remember where you come from, she murmured. Not the pain, but the love. My fingers shook as I loosened the drawstring and looked inside. Nestled in the soft velvet was a simple gold wedding band worn smooth with decades of life and love. My grandmother's wedding ring, the ring she had worn for 50 years. I cupped it gently as though holding a piece of her heart. Your grandmother told me, Linda continued, that this ring symbolizes the opposite of what your parents showed you. This ring represents real love, steady, faithful, kind. She wanted you to have it so you'd remember that healthy relationships exist, that you come from love, not just pain. My throat tightened painfully. I slipped the ring onto my right hand, expecting it to feel foreign, but the metal warmed instantly against my skin, fitting as though it had always been meant for me. I can't believe she saved this for me, I said softly. Linda nodded. Oh, she saved everything for you. Her trust, her hopes, her strength. She knew you needed something to carry with you into the future. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of those words settle. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift inside me. A release, a letting go, not of the memories or the scars, but of the belief that I was defined by them. I had fought for justice. And now, as I stood with my grandmother's letter and her wedding ring, I realized that healing was the next chapter, one she had given me permission to begin. Linda watched me with gentle eyes. She loved you very much, Jordan. More than you'll ever know. I know, I whispered. I can feel it. A silence settled between us, warm and filled with meaning. I tucked the letter carefully back into its envelope and held the ring close to my heart. I felt lighter somehow, as though the burden I'd been carrying for decades had finally been acknowledged, understood, and released by the one person whose love had never wavered. I thought that was the end of it. But Linda shifted her weight, hesitating. "There is one more thing," she said quietly. "Your grandmother left a video message." My heart skipped. "But she said you should only watch it when you're ready." Linda continued, "Ready to truly let go and move forward." Her words hung in the air like the beginning of a new chapter, waiting patiently for me to turn the page. In the weeks after receiving my grandmother's letter and her wedding ring, my life took on a quieter rhythm, steady, purposeful, almost peaceful. The courtroom battles were behind me. The truth had done its work, and the echoes of my family's destruction no longer dictated the temperature of my days. Instead, something new started growing in the empty spaces they left behind. For the first time, I felt the stirring of a life I was choosing, rather than one I was surviving. It began with a simple decision expanding the Margaret Rivera Memorial Fund. What started as a small scholarship initiative for children slowly transformed into something far larger and far more personal. I realized that if I wanted to honor my grandmother's legacy, I shouldn't limit the fund to education alone. Her final letter had urged me to move forward to build something beautiful out of everything I had endured. So I shifted the mission of the nonprofit entirely. If I could help women break free from the kinds of toxic environments that had trapped me for so long, then every painful chapter of my life would find purpose. Within the first 3 months, I partnered with social workers, legal advocates, and therapists to create a structured support program: temporary housing, legal aid, counseling, job training, and emergency financial assistance. Every piece mirrored a part of my own journey. Things I had needed but never received when I was struggling inside my family's dysfunction. 8 months later, the fund had helped 23 women and their children escape dangerous or emotionally abusive situations. Some fled violent partners. Others, like me, escaped households where emotional cruelty was disguised as family values. One woman, a 42-year-old named Maria, stood out in particular. She approached me one afternoon after a job training session. Her voice trembled as she said, "You saved my life. I thought I was crazy for wanting to leave my family. Hearing your story showed me it's okay to choose myself." I felt something settle in my chest at her words. I didn't save her life, she saved her own. But if my journey gave her permission to trust her instincts, then maybe the pain I endured had meaning after all. I never took a salary from the nonprofit. My consulting business funded my personal life just fine, and it felt right pure even to direct every donation toward the women who needed it. The work filled me with a sense of devotion I didn't know I was capable of. Every email from a woman marking her first month of safety, every photo of a child smiling in our tutoring program, every whispered thank you, breathed life into parts of me I thought were permanently numb. But the biggest transformation came from the property my grandmother's house. For months, I avoided making decisions about it. The idea of living there felt suffocating. The walls too steeped in memory, in hurt, in echoes of Veronica's voice. Selling it felt wrong, as though I would be erasing my grandmother's final act of protection. Then one evening, the answer struck me with such clarity it felt almost like Margaret whispering in my ear. I would turn the house into the headquarters for the nonprofit. It wasn't just symbolic, it was poetic. A reclamation, a rewriting. I hired contractors and walked them through every room, telling them what each space meant and what it would become. The living room, once a place of constant judgment, became a community meeting area, filled with warm lighting and comfortable seating. The dining room, where I had endured countless criticisms, transformed into a classroom for job skills training. My childhood bedroom, where I had often cried in silence, became an office for legal advocates helping women file restraining orders or custody petitions. But I kept one room untouched, my grandmother's bedroom. Instead of renovating it, I turned it into a quiet library and meditation space. Her favorite rocking chair remained by the window. On the far wall hung a simple plaque. In memory of Margaret Rivera, who taught us that real family is built on love, not obligation. The day of the grand opening, 200 community members arrived. Donors, volunteers, women. We had helped journalists, local leaders. As I cut the ribbon, applause erupted, echoing against the walls that had once absorbed nothing but tension. Several people commented on the irony of the transformation. One woman hugged me and whispered, "Turning a house of pain into a house of healing. Your grandmother would be so proud." I believed she would. Even with the nonprofit flourishing, I knew I couldn't avoid my own emotional work any longer. I had dismantled my family's lies, built something meaningful from the wreckage, and helped others begin new lives. But healing myself was an entirely different challenge. So I began therapy. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, specialized in family trauma and adult survivors of narcissistic parents. She had a calm presence that made the room feel safe even when the topics didn't. During our first session, she asked me why I had come. I told her I wanted to stop feeling defined by my past, that I was tired of carrying a tension in my chest I couldn't shake. She nodded with understanding and said, "Let's start with the story you've been told about yourself. We're going to unlearn it." Session by session, we unpacked 35 years of emotional bruises. We talked about terms I'd never heard before: scapegoat child, narcissistic family system complex, PTSD. Each label didn't trap me, but freed me. They explained patterns I once thought were personal failures. They gave shape to wounds that had always felt formless. Dr. Kim helped me understand why I apologized too quickly, why I hesitated before expressing needs, why silence felt safer than confrontation. She taught me to set boundaries, to recognize red flags, to be gentle with myself on days when grief resurfaced unexpectedly. I also joined a support group for adult children of narcissistic parents. Sitting in a circle with strangers who echoed pieces of my childhood was both heartbreaking and liberating. I heard my story in their words, the self-doubt, the guilt, the longing for affection that never came. And each week I left feeling a little less alone. As the months passed, I noticed changes I never expected. I laughed more freely. I went on dates, nothing serious yet, but I no longer felt terrified of bringing someone into my life. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted from, explaining pieces of my past I had once been afraid to voice. The tension in my chest eased little by little, like a storm cloud dissolving after years of blocking the sun. I wasn't healed, not fully. Healing isn't a destination, but a process. But for the first time, I felt like I was truly living, not performing or bracing for the next blow. Then, almost exactly 1 year after the trial, I came home from a board meeting to find an envelope in my mailbox. My first thought was that it was another donation receipt or a thank you letter. But then I looked closer. The return address read, Federal Correctional Institution, Veronica Rivera. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me seemed to thicken. For a moment, I simply stood on the porch, the envelope heavy in my hand as the sun dipped low behind the trees. My mother. Writing to me. I had no idea what the letter contained: apology, manipulation, venom, regret, or something I couldn't yet name. I stared at the envelope, feeling my heartbeat in my fingertips. Whatever it was, it would force me to face a part of my past I still wasn't sure I was ready to open. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: my life would no longer be shaped by her words. Still, my hands trembled as I carried the letter inside. And for the first time in months, I feared what would come next. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for nearly 24 hours before I touched it again. Every time I passed it, something in my stomach tightened, a dull ache reminding me of all the years I had spent trying and failing to earn love from the woman who sent it. I told myself I wouldn't open it. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. I told myself that no words Veronica could write would have any power over the life I had built since the trial. But avoidance has a way of growing heavier the longer it lingers, and by the next morning, the weight of the unopened envelope felt like a shadow stretching across the room. So I sat at the dining table, took a steadying breath, and opened it. 3 pages, handwritten, her script still sharp, and controlled the way she conducted her life. For a brief moment, I wondered whether I might find a trace of remorse in the lines, a flicker of self-awareness, even a hollow attempt at apology. I wasn't naive enough to expect genuine accountability, but perhaps time and confinement had softened her edges. But the first line reminded me exactly who she was. "You destroyed this family. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just accusation." I read on. The words spilled across the page with a venom so familiar I felt no sting, only recognition. "I hope you're happy now with your grandmother's blood money and your righteous crusade. You've always needed to feel superior to everyone around you. You never understood the pressure I was under raising 3 children and maintaining our reputation." I paused, my fingers tightening on the paper. The refrain was always the same: her sacrifices, her burdens, her image. My existence had always been in her mind an inconvenience she tolerated rather than a daughter she raised. She continued, "Yes, I made mistakes with the charity, but you made it your personal mission to humiliate me in the cruelest way possible. A real daughter would have handled this privately. But of course you were never really my daughter. You were always more hers." I read the entire letter once slowly, then again faster, scanning for even one line that hinted at accountability or regret or introspection. There was nothing. Not a single acknowledgement of harm. No recognition of the people she exploited. No understanding of what she had done to me. The entire letter was a monument to self-pity and erasure. And what struck me most was the absence of feeling inside me as I reached the final sentence. No anger, no grief, no longing. Just clarity. I folded the pages, neatly placed them in a small box labeled "Closed Chapters," and set it on the top shelf of my closet. Not to revisit, not to cherish, but to contain. A relic of a story that no longer defined me. I did not cry. I did not rage. I did not break. It was simply the final confirmation of what I had already accepted. Some people do not change. And it is not our job to make them. Life, however, has a remarkable way of offering balance. For every demonstration of Veronica's unchanged cruelty, there was Isabella's transformation unfolding quietly, steadily before my eyes. By the time a year had passed since the trial, she had moved into her own apartment in my building, a small 2-bedroom on the 5th floor. She paid her rent on time. She worked full-time now as a coordinator at a domestic violence shelter, helping women navigate systems she once knew nothing about. The work wasn't glamorous and certainly not lucrative, but she loved it with a sincerity that softened the edges of her past. She had also cut off contact with Veronica and Dominic entirely. It hadn't been easy. She cried for days the first time she blocked their numbers, grieving the idea of family more than the people themselves. But she stayed firm, guided by her therapist and her own growing sense of self. One evening, she invited me to dinner. "I'm cooking," she'd said, sounding both excited and apprehensive. I prepared myself. And rightly so. Her pasta was burnt, the sauce oddly sweet, and the salad overdressed to the point of drowning. But she set the table with such earnest care that I ate every bite with gratitude. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down and twisted her napkin in her hands. "I want to say something," she said, her voice small but steady. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know it might take years or forever or maybe not at all. But I want you to know something. You saved my life too." I blinked, startled. "Isabella." "No, let me finish," she said quickly. "Watching you stand up to them, it showed me I could do the same. I never realized how much control Mom had over me until I saw her lose control over you. I'm sorry for every time I hurt you. I'm sorry I stayed silent when you needed me. I'm sorry I believed her lies. And I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be your sister when you deserved one." Her voice cracked and she looked down at her plate. There was a time I would have absorbed her apology with suspicion. A time I would have waited for the angle or the manipulation. But there was none here. Her face was bare, no lashes, no contour, no designer armor. She was simply Isabella, stripped down to the woman underneath the years of conditioning. I reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "I'm not ready to say, 'I forgive you,' yet," I said softly. "But I see you trying. and that matters." She let out a slow breath, relief filling her eyes. For the first time in our lives, the space between us felt honest, fragile, tentative, but real. I didn't need to rebuild a perfect sisterhood. I just needed authenticity. And for the first time, I believed Isabella was capable of that. In the months that followed, I realized something profound: family is not defined by blood, but by presence. No contact with Veronica. Robert and Dominic wasn't a boundary anymore. It was a necessity. The absence of their voices, their judgment, their manipulation created a kind of peace I had never known. Instead, I found myself surrounded by people who made my life feel full in ways that once felt impossible. Dorothy, who came over every Sunday for tea and stories about Margaret. Linda, who had become a close friend and occasional volunteer at the community center. Dr. Kim, whose guidance reshaped the architecture of my self-worth. The women in my nonprofit who taught me resilience in a language deeper than words. And slowly, my chosen family formed not through obligation, but through connection. A year after the trial, on a quiet afternoon, I found myself sitting at my desk as warm sunlight filtered through the window. I had just finished reviewing grant proposals for the nonprofit when my eyes drifted to the small locked cabinet beside me. Inside it was a USB drive one Linda had handed me a year ago, the one she said contained my grandmother's final video message. I had not been ready to watch it then. But now, after a year of rebuilding, of healing, of reclaiming my life piece by piece, something inside me shifted. I unlocked the cabinet. My hand hovered over the USB for a moment, my breath catching in my chest. Then I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers, feeling its cool weight. I carried my laptop to the living room and sat on the couch. My hands trembled slightly as I plugged in the drive. A single file appeared on the screen. For Jordan. When you're ready. And for the first time, I truly was. I hit play. When the video opened, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, my grandmother sitting in that familiar floral armchair by her bedroom window, sunlight catching the silver strands in her hair. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face more fragile, but her eyes were still bright, still filled with that gentle knowing that had always made me feel seen in a world that tried so hard to erase me. "Hello, my darling Jordan," she began, her voice soft but steady. "If you're watching this, it means you've fought for yourself and won. You've exposed the truth. You've taken back your power. And I pray that you're starting to heal." My chest tightened, and I felt my shoulders tremble. I pulled a blanket around me, curling into the couch, as if trying to get closer to her, to soak in the warmth that radiated even through a screen. "I want to tell you something I should have said more when I was alive." She paused, swallowing hard. "You are not what they said you were. You were never a disappointment, never a burden, never difficult. You were a sensitive, brilliant child in an environment that punished sensitivity and intelligence." The tears pressed against the edges of my vision, but I held still, listening. "You survived something that would have broken most people," she continued, "and you did it with grace. Even as a little girl, you tried to be kind, to be patient, to be helpful. You tried to make yourself smaller so the world around you wouldn't hurt as much. I saw it. I saw all of it." She wiped a tear from her cheek, and for a moment, she closed her eyes as if steadying herself. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you more," she said, voice wavering. "I was afraid. Afraid that if I confronted them directly, they would cut me off from you completely. And then you'd have no one. I stayed close in the only ways I thought I could, without losing access to you. Maybe I was wrong to stay quiet. Maybe I should have shouted the truth from the rooftops. But please know, my darling, I did what I thought was right with the choices I had." I pressed a hand to my chest. Hearing her say what I had long suspected, that she stayed silent to stay near me, felt like a balm being poured over old wounds. She took a slow breath and smiled softly. "Now, sweetheart, I need you to do something for me." Her tone shifted slightly, warm but firm. Let go. My lips parted as if to respond, though she wasn't here to hear it. Let go of the anger you've earned the right to put it down now. Let go of the hope that they'll change or apologize. Some people are too damaged to grow. And most importantly, let go of the question, what's wrong with me? Nothing, Jordan. There was never anything wrong with you. I felt the words hit something deep, an ache carved into me long before I understood what generational trauma even meant. Every insult, every dismissal, every cold look I endured as a child had whispered that question into my bones. What's wrong with me? And here she was, finally giving me permission to stop asking it. She leaned slightly closer to the camera, her smile tender. I love you, Jordan. I always have. You were the best part of my life. And now I want you to go live the beautiful life you deserve. She lifted her hand in a small wave, the kind she used to give me when I drove away after visiting her, and the screen faded to black. For several seconds I didn't move. The silence in the room felt different now, not heavy, but full, like the air after a summer storm has cleared. Then the tears came, not the tight, controlled tears I'd shed under pressure, but deep, shaking sobs that racked me from the inside out. I cried for the little girl who used to hide in her closet with books because the living room felt hostile. I cried for the teenager who spent hours tutoring Dominic, hoping he'd say thank you just once. I cried for the young woman who worked 80-hour weeks and then gave away her entire startup windfall, praying it would finally earn her a place in her own family. But for the first time, I also cried with relief. Real, profound relief. The battle was over. I didn't have to fight anymore. I didn't have to prove myself. I didn't have to hold the weight of people who would never change. Margaret had given me permission to release everything I had been gripping so tightly just to survive. When the sobs finally eased, I walked to the bathroom and splashed cool water on my face. My reflection stared back at me, eyes red, cheeks, wet hair a mess. But something was different. Something softer. Something open. I looked at myself fully without flinching. I'm proud of you, I whispered. The unfamiliar words trembled at first, then steadied. I'm proud of you. And I meant every syllable. 3 months passed in what felt like a blur and a blooming. Life began to feel less like a battleground and more like fertile soil. The community center, the renovated house that once held decades of tension, celebrated its 1-year anniversary. The rooms that were once filled with whispered criticisms and suffocating expectations now echoed with laughter, children's footsteps, and the quiet hum of healing conversations. 50 people attended the celebration. Women we had helped, volunteers, donors, and neighbors walked through the hallways with awe. Someone pointed to the plaque in Margaret's meditation room and whispered, "She must have been a remarkable woman." I smiled. She was. Dorothy gave a short speech, sharing stories about Margaret, her humor, her stubbornness, her wisdom. Then she spoke about the legacy we were building. Margaret believed in courage, she said, and Jordan embodies it. I felt my cheeks flush, but not with discomfort, more like the warmth of being understood. Isabella took the microphone next, her hands trembling but her voice clear. I spent most of my life pretending to be someone I'm not, to please someone who didn't deserve my loyalty, she said. My sister showed me what real strength looks like, not the strength to dominate or manipulate, but the strength to choose truth even when it costs everything. She paused, tears filling her eyes. Jordan, I'm still learning, but I want to thank you for giving me the chance to become someone better. The room applauded, and I felt something inside me loosen, another piece of the old story falling away. I didn't give a speech. I didn't feel the need to. I spent the evening moving through the crowd, listening to women share their own stories, celebrating small victories, hugging children who ran around with cupcakes and sticky fingers. Their joy felt like sunlight seeping into parts of me I hadn't realized were still dark. Later that evening, after the last guests had left and the center was quiet again, I drove to Riverside Cemetery with a bouquet of lilies. The air was cool, the sky streaked with purples and golds. I knelt by Margaret's grave, brushing leaves from the stone. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered. "I'm free." The words weren't dramatic, they were simply true. On my way back to the car, my phone buzzed. A friend inviting me to dinner. For a brief second, I hesitated old habits, but the hesitation evaporated almost immediately. "Yes," I said aloud, smiling. "Yes." I slid into the driver's seat, rolled down the windows, and pulled onto the road as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. The music on the radio drifted through the car, warm and easy. And for the first time ever, I felt something I didn't know was possible. I felt at peace. As I look back on everything that happened, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't exposing the truth or watching those who hurt me finally face the consequences of their own choices. The real victory was understanding that I deserved a life built on peace, dignity, and self-worth, one that didn't require permission or validation from anyone. The past shaped me, yes, but it no longer defines me. What once felt like a burden has become the foundation of my strength. Justice brought closure, but healing brought freedom. I learned that breaking away from those who harm you is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of survival. And choosing yourself after years of being told you didn't matter is one of the bravest things a person can do. If there is a human lesson in my story, it is this. You cannot control the family you are born into, but you can choose the family you build, and you can choose the person you become. Pain may shape us, but it doesn't have to cage us. For anyone listening who has carried silent wounds or felt trapped by expectations they never agreed to, I hope my journey reminds you that stepping away from toxicity is not selfish. It is an act of reclaiming your future. And every person deserves the chance to create a life filled with meaning, compassion, and integrity. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If you want to hear more narratives that explore resilience, justice, and the strength it takes to rise above hardship, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. And I genuinely want to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you? Have you ever had to stand up against unfairness in your own family or community? Share your thoughts in the comments. We grow stronger when we share our stories and listen to one another. This ending isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever chosen healing over hurt, truth over silence, and freedom over fear.